The blood moon hung over Budapest like a crimson eye, watching the eternal war play out in shadows between Gothic spires and cobblestone alleys. In this world, vampires didn't lurk in sewers or abandoned warehouses. They ruled from marble estates, wore tailored leather, and enforced their dominion through centuries of cold aristocratic power. The Lycans they hunted weren't mindless beasts, but rebels fighting for freedom from slavery. Their transformation, both curse and weapon against immortal oppression. It was a war of lineages and betrayals, where both sides had spilled enough blood to drown cities, and neither could claim righteousness. Into this ancient conflict fell something neither faction had ever encountered: a hunter who didn't care about their politics, their history, or their tragic justifications. A day walker who had spent his entire life perfecting one singular purpose: killing vampires. Blade crashed through the skylight of an abandoned factory on the Buda side of the Danube, his long black coat billowing as he hit the concrete floor in a three-point landing that cracked the age foundation. The dimensional rift sealed behind him with a sound like tearing reality, leaving only the scent of ozone and the faint taste of magic that made his jaw clench. He hated magic. Give him silver bullets and UV grenades over mystical bullshit any day. He rose slowly, hand instinctively moving to the sword strapped across his back, his other hand finding the modified Mac 11 holstered at his hip. The factory was dark, abandoned, industrial, typical vampire hunting ground, but something was wrong. The scent hit him immediately, and his eyes narrowed behind his signature sunglasses. Vampires, but different. The blood scent was purer somehow, older, more refined than the turned street trash he usually hunted. And there were dozens of them, moving through the building with military precision. Death dealers, though he didn't know that name yet. Elite vampire warriors in black leather tactical gear, armed with UV ammunition and silver nitrate rounds, closing in on a Lykan safe house 2 floors below. Blade's lips pulled back in something that wasn't quite a smile. He'd been tracking a rogue vampire cult through 3 states when Whistler's final encoded message had sent him to that warehouse in Detroit. Find the Crimson Chalice. Stop them from opening the gateway. The old man's last words before the vampire horde had overwhelmed his position. Blade had been too late to save him, but he'd followed the artifact's trail through that portal, expecting to find the cult's headquarters on the other side. Instead, he'd found a war zone where vampires moved like soldiers and carried weapons he'd never seen, where the moon hung wrong in the sky and the very air tasted of ancient blood. A scream echoed from below, human or close enough. Then gunfire. Silver rounds, he recognized the distinctive crack. The vampires were executing someone, and from the howls of pain that followed, their targets were fighting back with inhuman ferocity. Blade moved. He descended through the factory's skeletal infrastructure like a shadow with purpose, boots barely touching rusted catwalks as he closed the distance. The vampire hit squad never saw him coming. The first death dealer died with Blade's silver stake through her spine. The second with his katana removing her head in a movement too fast for aristocratic vampire reflexes to counter. Ancient bloodline or not, they died just as easily as the turned rabble back home. The remaining 4 death dealers spun, bringing their weapons to bear with impressive coordination. Blade was already moving, his Mac 11 spitting silver-loaded rounds that punched through their tactical armor like tissue paper. 2 more dropped, black blood spreading across marble white skin. The last 2 managed to return fire, but Blade had already rolled behind a support pillar, his enhanced hearing tracking their heartbeats. Slow, controlled, professional. Unknown hostile, one of them spoke into a comm device, her accent Eastern European and aristocratic. Requesting immediate backup at... Blade's UV grenades sailed through the air and detonated at their feet. The ultraviolet burst caught them both mid-sentence, their screams cutting off as ancient flesh combusted in ways that defied the laws of their world. In the Underworld universe, UV light was brutal but not instantly fatal. These vampires could survive brief exposure with severe burns. Blade's grenades were designed for Marvel vampires. The concentration was 5 times higher. They died as ash and screaming. In the sudden silence, Blade heard movement from the safe house chamber, multiple heartbeats fast and aggressive. Not vampires. Something else. He approached the blasted doorway, weapons ready, and found himself facing a dozen figures in various states of transformation. Men and women, their eyes glowing ice blue, and bones shifting beneath skin, caught between human and wolf. Lycans, werewolves. Back home, Blade would have started shooting immediately. Werewolves were monsters, period. But these weren't mindless beasts. They stood in defensive formation, protecting wounded behind them, weapons lowered but ready. They stared at him with intelligence, confusion, and calculation. "You're not a death dealer," one of them said, a massive figure with scars crossing his face. "But you fight like you've been killing vampires your whole life." Blade's expression didn't change. "Because I have been." "Then we have common cause," the Lycan continued, gesturing to the ash piles Blade had created. "The Covens have hunted us for centuries, enslaved us. Any enemy of Victor's regime is—" "I'm not your ally," Blade cut him off, his voice flat and cold. "I hunt vampires. That doesn't make you the good guys. Doesn't make you human." His hand tightened on his sword. "Where I come from, monsters are monsters. I've seen what your kind do when the moon rises." The Lycans tensed, their transformation accelerating, claws extending. The scarred one raised a hand, holding them back. "Then you don't understand our war. We didn't choose this curse. It was forced upon us by vampire experimentation. We fight for freedom, not bloodlust." Before Blade could respond, his enhanced senses screamed a warning. The entire building had gone silent. No heartbeats, no breathing. Just the sudden, overwhelming presence of something impossibly old and impossibly hungry, descending from above like judgment. She dropped through the skylight Blade had shattered, landing in a crouch that cracked the concrete, her black leather death dealer uniform pristine despite the three-story fall. Her dark hair framed a face of classical beauty and absolute zero emotion. Ice blue eyes locked onto Blade with the focus of a predator, recognizing another apex hunter. Selene, first among death dealers, Victor's most loyal warrior, had arrived, and in her hand, a modified Beretta loaded with UV rounds was already rising toward Blade's center mass. "Intruder," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 6 centuries. "You just killed my entire squad. Surrender or burn." Blade's response was to draw his sword, the silver blade singing as it cleared the sheath. His sunglasses reflected the blood moon streaming through the shattered skylight. "Some motherfuckers," he said calmly. "Women are always trying to ice skate uphill. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below." Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. The factory exploded into violence as 2 perfect hunters collided for the first time, while the Lycans scattered and the ancient war between bloodlines found itself disrupted by a force neither faction had anticipated, a daywalker who didn't care about their centuries of grievances, only about the hunt. And somewhere in the depths of the old world Coven, Victor stirred from his daily slumber, disturbed by reports of an impossible warrior who moved in daylight and killed death dealers like they were fledglings. An abomination that would need to be destroyed or controlled before it upset the delicate balance of eternal war. The blood moon watched. The hunt had begun. Selene moved like liquid death, her centuries of combat experience translating into movements that would have killed any normal human 3 times over. She fired as she advanced, UV rounds tracking Blade's center mass with mechanical precision. But Blade wasn't any normal human, and he'd been dodging bullets since before she'd last walked in sunlight. He twisted, coat flaring, the rounds passing close enough to feel their heat. His Mac 11 came up in response, silver-loaded magazine dumping toward her position. Selene's preternatural speed let her evade most of them, but one caught her shoulder, spinning her mid-stride. She grunted, the first sound of pain, black blood seeping through her tactical leather. Silver. The wound burned with toxicity her vampire physiology couldn't immediately heal. She'd expected UV weapons, perhaps explosive rounds, not silver. The Covens had engineered immunity to most traditional vampire weaknesses over centuries of selective breeding and scientific advancement. But this wasn't traditional silver. Blade's ammunition was alchemically treated, blessed by methods Whistler had perfected over decades of monster hunting. It burned Underworld vampires just as effectively as it did Marvel's bloodsuckers. You bleed, Blade observed, circling her like a shark. Good, means you can die. Selene's eyes narrowed, reassessing. This warrior wasn't Lykan. His scent was wrong, partially vampiric but fundamentally other. He moved in daylight without hesitation, fought with a hunter's ruthless efficiency, and showed no recognition of Coven hierarchy or Death Dealer authority. An unknown variable in a war that had followed predictable patterns for 600 years. She needed him alive for questioning. Victor would want to know what he was, where he came from, and how to kill more like him. Blade had no such limitations. He pressed his advantage, closing the distance with his sword leading. The katana blade was silver-edged and acid-etched with symbols that made Selene's vampiric instincts scream warnings. She drew her twin combat knives, the blessed silver meeting his blade with a shriek of metal that sent sparks cascading across the factory floor. They exchanged a flurry of strikes that would have been invisible to human eyes. Thrust, parry, riposte, dodge. Selene's 6 centuries of swordsmanship against Blade's lifetime of hunting the undead. She was faster by a fraction, her ancient blood giving her marginally superior reflexes. He was stronger, his daywalker hybrid physiology granting him power that shouldn't exist. "What are you?" she demanded, her knives locking against his sword. They stood nose to nose, her ice blue eyes searching his face behind those signature sunglasses. "Your worst nightmare," Blade growled. "A vampire who hunts vampires." Her eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. "Impossible. The Corvinus strain only manifested in—" He broke the blade lock with raw strength, sending her stumbling back. "I don't know what the fuck a Corvinus is. I know what you are. Bloodsucker. Aristocratic. Organized. Playing soldier. It doesn't matter." His sword came up, pointing at her heart. "You all burn the same." Behind them, the Lykans had retreated to the building's perimeter, watching this confrontation with confused fascination. Their enemy's elite enforcer was fighting something that killed vampires with prejudice, but showed them no allegiance. Some of the pack wanted to flee while the Death Dealer was distracted. Others wanted to attack while she was vulnerable. The scarred Lykan leader, Reyes, Victor's former slave and Lucian's lieutenant, held them in check with a raised hand. He'd survived 3 centuries by knowing when to fight and when to observe. This stranger had dropped 6 Death Dealers in under 30 seconds. Reyes wanted to see what he'd do to Selene before deciding if he was asset or threat. Selene's tactical mind raced through scenarios. She couldn't defeat him in direct combat. He was too strong, too experienced, and her silver wound was slowing her regeneration. But she didn't survive 6 centuries as Victor's most effective Death Dealer through strength alone. She survived through adaptation. "You hunt vampire," she said, slowly lowering her knives. "Then you don't understand the war you've entered. The Lykans behind you aren't innocent victims. They're William's descendants, the first and most savage werewolf, imprisoned because he couldn't control his bloodlust. They spread their infection like plague, turning humans into beasts." Blade's expression didn't change, but his sword didn't lower either. "The vampires you killed were defending humanity from that spread," Selene continued, her voice taking on the rehearsed quality of Victor's propaganda. "We maintain order, to control the chaos. Without the Coven's structure, the Lykan infection would consume—" "Spare me the fascist recruitment speech," Blade cut her off. "I've heard it before. We're the necessary evil. We protect humanity. Our slavery and murder are for the greater good." "Different continent, same bullshit," he gestured with his sword toward the Lykan safe house. "I don't buy their freedom fighter act either. Saw what werewolves do to innocent people. Seen the bodies, the torn families. The infection spread." His jaw tightened. "But I also know vampire aristocracy when I see it. The fancy clothes, the marble estates, the casual cruelty of immortals who see humans as cattle." Selene's hand moved with supernatural speed toward her backup weapon, a UV flashbang designed to blind and burn. Blade's reflexes were faster. His sword slashed across her extended arm, silver blade cutting deep. She hissed, stumbling back, black blood streaming. "Don't," he warned, his voice carrying absolute certainty. I've killed older vampires than you, stronger ones. Dracula himself, if you believe the legends. You're fast, you're skilled, but you're not walking away from this if you keep fighting. For the first time in centuries, Selene felt something she'd almost forgotten. Genuine uncertainty. Not fear, not quite, but the recognition that she'd encountered something completely outside her experience. Victor's teaching, Marcus's ancient knowledge, even the Corvinus strain theories. None of them accounted for a day-walking vampire hunter who moved like he'd been born to kill her kind. She needed information more than she needed victory. Needed to understand what he was before she could determine how to destroy him. The tactical retreat was a weapon she'd used before. Then we're at an impasse, she said carefully, her wounds already beginning to heal around the silver contamination. Slowly, painfully. You've made your position clear. You hunt all vampires, refuse Lykan alliance. But you're in Budapest now, in the heart of the Old World Coven's territory. Victor will send armies after you. Let him, Blade said simply. You don't understand, Selene pressed. Victor is an elder, 14 centuries old. He commands hundreds of death dealers, controls the city's infrastructure, has resources you cannot imagine. The last time someone challenged his authority directly, he had their entire bloodline burned alive in a single night. Blade's expression might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. Your elder vampire ever faced someone who can walk in sunlight? Who doesn't give a fuck about vampire politics or blood purity? Who spent 30 years perfecting ways to kill things that think they're immortal? He sheathed his sword in one fluid motion, though his hand remained ready near his weapons. I'm not here for your war. I'm tracking something, an artifact that crossed dimensional barriers. The Crimson Chalice. You see anything like that, you tell me. Otherwise, stay out of my way. Selene's mind cataloged that information. Dimensional barriers, artifacts. This wasn't Lycan science or even ancient vampire magic. This was something else entirely, and Victor would want every detail. I haven't seen any chalice, she said truthfully, but I know someone who tracks mystical artifacts across bloodlines. Tannis, a historian exiled from the Covens. He deals in forbidden knowledge. She tilted her head slightly. I could take you to him, in exchange for information about what you are. Behind them, Ray's tensed. Selene offering aid to an unknown was completely out of character. She was Victor's perfect soldier, loyal to the point of absolute. This had to be a trap. Blade's enhanced senses detected the Lycan's shifting position, preparing to flee or fight. He could hear their accelerated heartbeats, smell the musk of partial transformation. The vampire in front of him was wounded but calculating, her offer too convenient. And yet, if this Tannis knew about mystical artifacts, he might have information about the chalice. Might know what the vampire cult had been planning, why they'd opened that portal. Whistler's death couldn't be for nothing. Sure, you try anything, Blade said quietly, and I'll paint these walls with what passes for your blood. We clear? Selene nodded once, crisp and military. Perfectly clear, Daywalker. She turned toward the exit, pausing to address Rays and the Lycan pack. Tell Lucian that something new has entered our war, something neither Coven nor pack control. Tell him the old rules no longer apply. Rays' scarred face twisted into something between snarl and grin. Lucian will want to meet this one himself. I'm sure he will, Selene replied. Then to Blade, my car is outside. Unless you'd prefer to walk through vampire-controlled Budapest alone and unarmed with... I'm never unarmed, Blade interrupted. With sunrise still 4 hours away, she finished, Victor's patrols will have heard the gunfire. They'll be converging on this location within minutes. Blade glanced at the ash piles that had been her death dealer squad, then at the Lycans who still watched him with uncertain eyes, then at the wounded vampire offering him transportation. Some choices weren't about trust. They were about tactical advantage. Lead the way, he said. But vampire, if this is a trap, I'll make sure you live long enough to regret it. Selene smiled, a cold expression that held centuries of darkness. If I wanted you dead, Daywalker, I would have already called Victor. Whatever you are, you're too valuable to destroy without understanding first. She moved toward the exit, her leather coat swirling. Blade followed, his instincts screaming warnings but his purpose driving him forward. Behind them, the Lycans melted into shadows, one carrying word to Lucian that the eternal war had just become infinitely more complicated. Outside, the blood moon continued its vigil over Budapest, and in the depths of Ortogaz, the old world Coven's fortress, Victor opened his eyes in his stone sarcophagus, disturbed from daily death by urgent reports of chaos and an impossible warrior. The ancient elder's awakening sent ripples through every vampire in the city, a psychic weight that made Selene unconsciously straighten her posture as she led Blade toward her vehicle. The hunt was spreading, and the Daywalker had just agreed to walk into the heart of vampire aristocracy. Selene's car was a modified silver Jaguar XJ, armored and equipped with UV-shielded windows that allowed vampires to move during daylight hours in relative safety. Blade studied it with professional assessment as he slid into the passenger seat. Reinforced chassis, run-flat tires, weapon storage compartments built into the doors. A hunter's vehicle, adapted for creatures who hunted at night. "Impressive," he said neutrally, checking his weapons as Selene pulled into Budapest's pre-dawn streets. "Your people take the soldier thing seriously." "6 centuries of war teaches efficiency," Selene replied, navigating the Gothic architecture and narrow medieval lanes with practiced ease. "The Lycans evolve their tactics. We evolve ours. Stagnation means extinction." Blade watched the city pass by, ancient churches alongside modern infrastructure, the Danube reflecting the blood moon's crimson light. Nothing moved on the streets. Not unusual for 3 a.m., but his instincts detected wrongness in the absolute stillness. This wasn't a sleeping city. This was a controlled one. "How many?" he asked. "How many what?" "Vampires in this city." Selene was silent for a moment, calculating whether to answer truthfully. The Old World Coven maintains approximately 400 full members within Budapest, another 200 servants, ghouls, and protected bloodlines. Death Dealer strike teams number 73 active combatants. Blade whistled low. "That's an infestation, not a coven." "That's civilization," Selene corrected, an edge entering her voice. "Structure, law, order maintained through centuries of careful breeding and political maneuvering. We don't slaughter indiscriminately like your kind apparently does." "My kind?" Blade's hand drifted toward his sword. "Honey, you choose your next words carefully, vampire." "Vampire hunters," she clarified, though her tone suggested she'd meant something else. "You kill without understanding context, history, or necessity. 6 death dealers dead because they were executing Lycans who had murdered 3 human families last week. Did you ask what they'd done before you decided we were the villains?" Blade's jaw tightened. Back home, he'd learned early that vampire justifications were always bullshit. They killed because they fed, and they fed because they were parasites. No amount of aristocratic sophistication changed that fundamental truth. But he also remembered the Lycan Pack's defensive formation, protecting wounded, their leader's offer of alliance, the intelligence in their eyes that spoke of more than bestial hunger. "Tell me about the war," he said finally. "Your real version, not the propaganda." Selene glanced at him, surprised. Most would demand she justify her existence or threaten her with immediate violence. This Daywalker wanted information first. Tactical, professional. "The first vampire was Marcus Corvinus," she began, her voice taking on the quality of recited history. "Born mortal in the 5th century, bitten by a bat carrying a plague mutation. The infection transformed him into something new. Immortal, powerful, sustained by blood. His twin brother William was bitten by a wolf, became the first werewolf. Where Marcus retained his humanity, William became a mindless beast, spreading his infection uncontrollably." The Jaguar turned down a narrow alley, heading toward the Danube's historic district. Blade noted the route, multiple escape paths, minimal surveillance. She was taking him somewhere off the official Coven grid. "Marcus couldn't bring himself to kill William," Selene continued. "Their father, Alexander Corvinus, was the original carrier. Immortal but unchanged, he founded a secret society to contain the vampire and Lycan threat. Marcus eventually allied with a warlord named Victor, who he turned into a vampire in exchange for an army to hunt and imprison William." "Let me guess," Blade interjected. Victor decided he liked being immortal and powerful. Took over. Victor built an empire, Selene said, defensive. Created the death dealers to contain the Lykan spread. Established covens across Europe. Brought order to chaos. Yes, he enslaved the Lykans who could control their transformation, used them as labor, as servants. But the alternative was William's plague consuming humanity. Blade had heard similar justifications from vampire lords across 3 continents. The details changed, but the core remained identical. Where necessary, we protect humanity. Our evil is justified evil. And the Lycans rebelled, he said flatly. Lucian, Victor's favored slave, fell in love with Victor's daughter Sonia. Selene's voice tightened with old pain. They conceived a child, an abomination, a hybrid of vampire and Lycan bloodlines. Victor discovered the pregnancy and executed Sonia in front of Lucian. Burned her alive in daylight. For the first time, Blade detected genuine emotion beneath her cold exterior. Not sympathy for Lucian or horror at Victor's cruelty, but something more complex. Grief, perhaps. Or recognition of injustice she couldn't acknowledge. Lucian survived the execution Victor stage, she continued. He escaped, built an army of freed Lycans, and has been waging war against the Covens ever since. 60 years of burning estates, killing vampires, and trying to restart the hybrid program that cost him everything. So you've got a tyrant who murders his own daughter for loving wrong, and a revolutionary who wants to create super soldiers, Blade summarized. And you're asking me to pick a side? I'm asking you to understand that your simplistic morality doesn't apply here, Selene snapped. This isn't good versus evil. It's order versus chaos, structure versus anarchy. Victor's methods are harsh, but they maintain stability. Lucian's rebellion will plunge Europe into war that kills millions. The Jaguar pulled into an underground garage beneath a crumbling building that looked abandoned from street level. Selene cut the engine, turning to face Blade directly. Tannis is through there. She indicated a steel door with electronic locks. He was a Coven historian who dealt in forbidden knowledge, researching the Corvinus bloodline, questioning Victor's authority. Victor had him exiled rather than executed. He survives by trading information to both sides of the war. Blade studied the setup. Single entrance, underground, perfect for an ambush. And you just happen to know where the exiled historian lives. I visit him occasionally, Selene admitted. For information Victor wouldn't approve of me seeking. Like what? Her ice blue eyes met his sunglasses shielded gaze. Like the truth about my family, about how I became a death dealer, about whether everything Victor taught me was a necessary lie. Blade's enhanced hearing detected her heartbeat. Slow, controlled, but with a slight irregularity that suggested genuine uncertainty. The vampire was questioning her lord, not openly, not enough to rebel, but the doubt was there. You're a slave questioning your chains, he observed, but you haven't broken them yet. And you're a hunter who sees everything in black and white, she countered, who destroys without understanding. We're both products of our trauma, Daywalker. Before Blade could respond, his vampire senses screamed warning. The garage's temperature had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. The shadows in the corners weren't natural darkness. They were moving, coalescing, forming shapes that defied physics. Selene's hand went to her weapon, her posture shifting to combat readiness. No, he shouldn't be awake. It's not his time. The steel door exploded inward, the electronic locks shattering like they were made of glass. Through the opening stepped a figure that made even Blade's battle-hardened instincts pause. Victor. 14 centuries of existence had refined the vampire lord into something beyond mortal comprehension. His silver hair fell to his shoulders, his aristocratic features carved with the authority of ages, his black and crimson robes flowing like liquid night. But it was his eyes that dominated, ancient, intelligent, utterly inhuman in their cold assessment of everything before him. Behind Victor, a dozen death dealers filed into the garage with military precision, weapons trained on Blade. And beside the elder, a creature that made Selene gasp in genuine shock. A vampire so old, so powerful, that the air around him warped with barely contained hunger. Marcus Corvinus, the first true vampire, awakened decades before his scheduled rotation. Selene, Victor's voice carried the weight of centuries. You disappoint me. I raised you from nothing, trained you to be my finest warrior, and you repay my faith by consorting with abominations? His gaze locked onto Blade. And you, Daywalker. You enter my domain, kill my soldiers, and think you can simply walk away? I am the law in this city. I am order incarnate. You will kneel, you will submit, or you will burn until your hybrid flesh fails and your mongrel blood dries to ash. Blade stood slowly, his hand resting on his sword. Around them, 12 death-dealer weapons tracked his every movement. Victor radiated power that made the vampire lord's Blade had faced seem like fledglings. And Marcus, the first vampire, watched with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that calculated Blade's worth the way a collector appraises a rare specimen. Here's the thing about tyrants, Blade said calmly, meeting Victor's ancient gaze without flinching. They all think they're special, think their age, their power, their control makes them untouchable. His hand tightened on his sword. But in the end, they all bleed, they all burn, they all die. He glanced at Selene, who stood frozen between her lord and this impossible warrior. You wanted to know what I am? I'm the thing that kills things like him. I'm the walking, talking proof that vampires aren't immortal. They're just parasites who haven't met the right exterminator yet. Victor's expression didn't change, but the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Marcus, you were correct. This one carries the perfected strain we've been seeking. The true fusion of vampire and human without the loss of daywalking ability. Marcus's voice was like dead leaves rustling. His blood could finally complete our work, could create vampires who walk in sunlight. An army of daywalkers under our control. Or, Victor continued, he could be destroyed as a warning to Lucian and every other creature who thinks to challenge the Coven's authority. His eyes shifted to Selene. What shall it be, my dear? Wash, do you stand with the order I built, or with the chaos he represents? Selene's hand trembled slightly on her weapon. For 6 centuries, Victor's word had been absolute law. Questioning him was unthinkable. Disobeying him was suicide. But she looked at this daywalker, this hunter who killed vampires without hesitation, and she saw something that terrified her more than Victor's wrath. She saw herself reflected in those sunglasses. A weapon, a tool, a slave who thought her chains were duty. The garage exploded into violence as Selene made her choice, her weapon rising not toward Blade, but toward the elder vampire who had controlled her existence for 600 years. Selene's UV rounds struck Victor's center mass before anyone could react. The ancient elder staggered, while his robes smoking where the ultraviolet light seared through fabric and flesh. Not fatal, 14 centuries of survival had taught him to armor himself with layered clothing and sheer force of will, but painful enough to shock every vampire in the garage into frozen disbelief. A death dealer did not attack an elder. The concept was so fundamentally impossible that for a crucial half-second, no one moved. Blade didn't waste the opportunity. His sword cleared its sheath as he launched himself at the nearest death dealers. Silver blade carving through the first one's throat before she could bring her weapon to bear. His Mach 11 came up in his offhand, silver rounds punching through tactical armor with methodical precision. 2 more dropped, black blood spraying across concrete. Treachery! Victor's roar shook the garage foundations, his ancient power manifesting as physical force that sent loose debris flying. Selene, you dare? She fired again, emptying her magazine into his chest while backing toward Blade's position. I dare question why you lied about my family, about how you found me, about everything. Marcus moved with speed that made Selene look frozen. The first vampire's hand caught her throat, lifting her off her feet and slamming her against the jaguar hard enough to dent reinforced steel. His grip tightened, ancient fingers crushing her windpipe. Disappointment, Marcus hissed, his voice carrying millennia of cold assessment. Victor promised you were the perfect soldier, but you're just another child playing at rebellion. Blade's sword met Marcus's forearm, silver blade biting deep into flesh that hadn't been wounded in 1,000 years. The first vampire screamed, an inhuman sound of rage and genuine pain, releasing Selene as he recoiled from the burning silver. She's not the only one who disappoints expectations, Blade said, pressing his advantage. His katana work was brutal efficiency, each strike aimed at vital points with a hunter's knowledge of vampire physiology. Marcus blocked, parried, his supernatural speed barely keeping pace with Blade's relentless assault. Behind them, Victor had recovered, his chest wounds already healing around the UV burns. "Kill them both!" he commanded the remaining death dealers. "Bring me their hearts!" The garage descended into chaos. 9 death dealers against 2 vampire hunters, except Selene wasn't used to being the hunted, and her 6 centuries of training worked against her as muscle memory screamed to protect Victor, so will not fight him. She hesitated, and a death dealer's knife opened her side in a spray of black blood. Blade had no such limitations. He'd spent 3 decades killing vampires who thought themselves superior, and the death dealer's military precision meant nothing against someone who'd faced down Deacon Frost's blood god form. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, silver blade, silver bullets, UV grenades that turned the garage into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Fall back!" one of the death dealers shouted into her comm. "Requesting immediate—" Blade's sword removed her head. The body crumpled, and he was already moving to the next target, his coat flaring like black wings as he carved through Victor's elite warriors. Marcus abandoned his fight with Blade, recognizing the tactical situation deteriorating. With inhuman speed, he seized 2 retreating death dealers and drained them in seconds, their ancient blood feeding his power. His wounds closed, his strength magnified, and when he turned back toward Blade, his eyes burned with hunger that predated civilization. "Your blood," Marcus breathed, his voice thick with anticipation. "I can taste its potential from here. Daywalker strain, perfected. What Victor wants to control, I want to consume. Your essence will make me complete. A vampire who walks in sunlight, unkillable by any natural means." He blurred forward, faster than Blade had seen any vampire move. Claws extended, aiming for Blade's throat. The Daywalker twisted, but not fast enough. Marcus's hand caught his shoulder, talons punching through leather and flesh. The first vampire's strength was astronomical, pinning Blade against a concrete pillar with crushing force. "Yes," Marcus hissed, bringing his fangs toward Blade's exposed neck. "Let me taste what you are. Let me take what you've become." Blade's response was to jam his UV grenade into Marcus's mouth and trigger it. The explosion was muffled by ancient flesh, but the ultraviolet burst at point-blank range did catastrophic damage. Marcus's head erupted in flames, his jaw disintegrating as he released Blade with a scream that shattered every window in the garage. The first vampire stumbled back, his face a mass of burning tissue, regenerating but slowly. Too much damage, too fast. Blade rolled to his feet, shoulder bleeding but functional. His enhanced healing was already closing the wound. "Older doesn't mean better, bloodsucker. It just means you've had more time to get arrogant." Victor watched his ancient ally stumble, watched his death dealers die, watched his perfect soldier turn traitor. The elder's face remained emotionless, but Blade's enhanced senses detected the micro-expressions: rage, calculation, grudging respect. This was a predator who'd survived 14 centuries by adapting to threats. "Impressive," Victor acknowledged, his voice cold and controlled. "You fight with skill I haven't witnessed in 500 years. And you, Selene, your betrayal is noted. But you both make a fundamental error." He raised his hand, and the entire building shuddered. Above them, Blade heard movement. Dozens of heartbeats, hundreds of footsteps. The garage ceiling began to crack as death dealers rappelled down from the floors above. When as ghouls poured through service entrances, as the full weight of Victor's coven mobilized. "You think this is my army?" Victor smiled without warmth. "This is my honor guard. My true strength lies in the thousands who owe me blood debts across this city. The families I've protected, the vampires I've elevated, the power structure I've built over 14 centuries. You cannot kill me, Daywalker. I am Budapest. I am the Old World Coven. I am order itself." Selene grabbed Blade's arm, her eyes urgent. "We need to leave. Now. He's calling in every asset. We'll be surrounded in minutes." "Running's not really my style," Blade replied, reloading his Mac 11 with his last silver magazine. "Then dying is your style," she snapped. You're good, Daywalker. Maybe the best hunter I've seen. But you can't fight 1,000 vampires simultaneously. Even you have limits. Above them, the ceiling collapsed as 20 death dealers crashed through in perfect formation, weapons blazing. UV rounds and silver nitrate filled the air. Blade's coat absorbed multiple hits, the reinforced leather buying him seconds as he dove behind the Jaguar. Marcus had recovered enough to speak, his face still regenerating around exposed bone. Victor, I need him alive. His blood is too valuable. Your obsession with the Corvinus strain has made you weak, Marcus? Victor interrupted coldly. We don't need his willing cooperation. We take what we require. The elder moved with speed that matched Marcus, crossing the garage in a blur. His hand, encased in a spiked gauntlet Blade hadn't seen him don, caught Blade's sword mid-swing. The metal screamed as Victor's grip bent silver-reinforced steel. How you want to hunt vampires? Victor's voice was inches from Blade's face, his ancient breath cold as a tomb. I've killed more of our kind than you've met, Daywalker. Rivals, traitors, weaklings who couldn't adapt. I am the apex of our species because I do what is necessary. Always. His other hand seized Blade's throat, lifting him off the ground with inhuman strength. Selene, watch as I demonstrate what happens to those who challenge order. Watch as I break this hunter piece by piece until he begs to serve me. Selene's weapon was empty. She was surrounded by death dealers, wounded, her 6 centuries of conditioning screaming at her to submit to Victor's authority. Every instinct said, bow your head, accept punishment, beg forgiveness. Instead, she thought of Sonia burning in daylight, of Victor's lies about her family, of 600 years spent as a perfect weapon, never questioning, never thinking, never choosing. She lunged forward, not with a weapon, but with her bare hands, clawing at Victor's face with desperate fury. You don't own me anymore! The distraction was enough. Blade's hand found the silver stake holstered at his belt and drove it upward into Victor's armpit, where the ancient armor didn't cover. The elder roared, releasing Blade as silver toxicity flooded his system. Tannis! Selene shouted toward the steel door. Emergency protocol, now! The exiled historian must have been watching because the building's fire suppression system activated. But instead of water, UV-treated liquid flooded the garage. Not concentrated enough to kill ancient vampires, but enough to buy seconds as every bloodsucker in the space screamed and sought cover. Blade grabbed Selene, pulling her toward the Jaguar. Can you drive with that wound? Can you survive without me? She countered, already behind the wheel. The engine roared to life as death dealers recovered and opened fire. Bullet holes spiderwebbed the UV-shielded glass. The Jaguar launched forward, ramming through the garage entrance and into Budapest's pre-dawn streets. Behind them, Victor's enraged roar echoed through the Coven's communication network, a psychic weight that made every vampire in the city aware that their elder had been challenged, wounded, and escaped. Selene drove with desperate precision, navigating narrow medieval lanes and modern boulevards with equal skill. Blood soaked her tactical leather, her healing slower than normal from the death dealer's blessed blade. We need sanctuary. Somewhere Victor can't reach us before sunrise. Where? Blade demanded, checking his weapons. He'd burned through most of his ammunition, his UV grenades were depleted, and his sword had a hairline crack from Victor's gauntlet. He needed to rearm, reload, and reassess. Lucian, Selene said, the name bitter in her mouth. The Lykan stronghold. It's the only place Victor won't attack directly. Too many Lykans. Too much risk of losing death dealers in their tunnels. Blade stared at her. You want to run to the werewolves? I want to survive until sunrise when Victor has to return to his crypt, she corrected. Then we regroup, find Tannis, get your answers about this crimson chalice. Her ice blue eyes met his. Hana, unless you prefer I drop you off here and you face Victor's army alone? The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten. 40 minutes until dawn. Victor would have to retreat to Ortagaz before the sun rose. But 40 minutes was an eternity when hundreds of vampires were hunting. Blade's phone vibrated. Impossible since his phone had been destroyed in the dimensional portal. He pulled out the device anyway, finding a single message on the cracked screen. Daywalker, impressive. I am Lucian. If you want to live, follow Selene. If you want to kill Victor, we should talk. L. How the fuck did he get this number? Blade muttered. Lucian has eyes everywhere, Selene replied. He's been planning Victor's downfall for 60 years. You just gave him the chaos he needed. Behind them, Rotter the Jaguar's rearview mirror showed 24 motorcycles with death dealers in pursuit. Ahead, the Danube reflected the blood moon's fading light as dawn approached. Blade made his decision. Take me to Lucian, but tell him I'm not joining his revolution. I'm hunting my artifact, killing vampires who get in my way, and leaving this fucked up war to you people. Selene almost smiled. You think it's that simple? Victor will never stop hunting you now. You wounded an elder, destroyed his death dealers, turned his perfect soldier. You're part of this war whether you want to be or not. The Jaguar plunged into the city's underground tunnel system, losing the pursuers in the labyrinth beneath Budapest. And as they descended into darkness, Blade realized the vampire was right. He'd come to this world hunting an artifact. But he'd stumbled into a war that had raged for centuries, and his presence had just shattered the fragile equilibrium between order and chaos. The Crimson Chalice would have to wait. First, he had to survive the full wrath of an elder vampire who ruled the city like a dark god. The Lykan stronghold existed in Budapest's forgotten places, abandoned Soviet-era subway tunnels beneath the city's eastern industrial district, where decades of neglect had created a warren of concrete passages that official maps no longer acknowledged. Selene navigated the Jaguar through increasingly narrow service tunnels, her knowledge of the city's hidden infrastructure, evidence of how thoroughly she'd studied her enemy. You've been here before, Blade observed, noting how confidently she maneuvered despite the darkness. 6 times, Selene admitted. Always tracking Lykan activity, always reporting back to Victor. Her jaw tightened. Never questioning why we hunted them so relentlessly. Never asking if Victor's version of history was truth or propaganda. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber that had once been a Cold War bunker. Now it served as sanctuary for over 200 Lykans, men, women, and children in various states of transformation. Makeshift living quarters lined the walls, scavenged technology powered by illegal electrical taps, the scent of humanity and wolf mixing into something primal. Armed Lykans surrounded the Jaguar before Selene cut the engine, their weapons a mix of modern firearms and improvised silver-resistant armor. They recognized her immediately, and the growls that echoed through the chamber promised violence. Easy, Blade said, stepping out with his hands visible but not raised in surrender. We're not here to fight. You bring a death dealer into our home, one of the Lykans snarled, his eyes glowing amber, bones already shifting beneath skin. Victor's perfect killer. How many of our people has she murdered, Daywalker? 73 confirmed kills, Selene answered flatly, refusing to hide behind lies. Over 6 centuries of service to the Covens. I followed orders. I believed the propaganda. She met the Lycan's gaze without flinching. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Blade's enhanced hearing detected dozens of Lycan heartbeats accelerating, claws extending. The chamber balanced on the edge of massacre. She saved my life, Blade added, the truth cutting through tension. Turned on Victor to stop him from taking me. That makes her either the bravest vampire I've met or the stupidest. Or both, a new voice interjected, deep and commanding. The Lykans parted as their leader emerged from the chamber's depths. Lucian was not what Blade expected. The Lycan revolutionary stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, his frame powerful but controlled, his dark hair streaked with silver that spoke of age and stress. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. Human in shape but carrying a weight of grief and determination that transcended species. This was not a mindless beast or a simple freedom fighter. This was a general who'd waged 60 years of guerrilla war against an immortal empire. Blade, Lucian said, the name carrying recognition. The Daywalker who killed 6 death dealers in under a minute. Who wounded Victor himself. Who made Selene question 6 centuries of conditioning. He approached carefully, noting Blade's hand resting on his sword. You've accomplished more damage to the Covens in one night than I've managed in decades. Wasn't trying to help your revolution, Blade replied. Was trying to survive Victor's welcome party. Lucian's smile held no warmth. And yet here you are, in the heart of Lycan resistance, with Victor's most elite warrior as your ally. He turned to Selene. Tell me, Death Dealer, what did Victor do to finally break his hold on you? Selene's expression remained controlled, but Blade detected the slight tremor in her voice. He lied about my family, about how I became a Death Dealer, about everything I've believed for 600 years. He killed them, Lucian said quietly. Your family. Your mortal family before he turned you? Victor doesn't recruit Death Dealers. He creates them from the orphans his wars produce, turns children into weapons, raises them to worship him as savior, ensures their loyalty is absolute because they have nothing else. The color drained from Selene's already pale face. You're lying. Am I? Lucian gestured to one of his lieutenants, a woman with kind eyes and a scholar's bearing. Erica, bring the archives. The female Lykan disappeared and returned moments later with a weathered leather portfolio. Inside were documents, photographs, yellowed with age. A Hungarian village, burned. Death Dealer reports signed by Victor himself. And a family portrait, a human family with a young girl who had Selena's ice blue eyes. 1694, Lucian said softly. Victor's covens were expanding territory, and your village refused to swear fealty. He burned it to ash, killed everyone, except one child he found hiding in the ruins, a child he saw potential in. Selene's hands shook as she held the portrait. 600 years of certainty crumbling in seconds. He told me he saved me from Lycans, that werewolves slaughtered my family, that I owed him everything. He told you what you needed to hear to become his perfect weapon, Lucian replied. I'm sorry, Selene. You deserve better than the life he gave you. Blade watched this emotional devastation with the detachment of someone who'd learned early that vampires were masters of manipulation. But he also recognized genuine trauma when he saw it. Selene wasn't just questioning her loyalty, she was confronting the reality that her entire existence had been built on lies. This is touching, Blade interjected, but I didn't come here for therapy. Lucian, you sent me that message. Said we should talk if I wanted to kill Victor. I'm listening. Lucian's focus shifted back to business, though his eyes held sympathy for Selene. Victor is an elder, one of the 3 most powerful vampires in existence. Marcus, whom you met, is another. The third is Amelia, currently sleeping in her crypt and not due to awaken for another decade. He led them deeper into the stronghold, past living quarters to a war room lined with maps, surveillance photos, and strategic diagrams that spoke of meticulous planning. The elders rotate their awakening in century-long cycles. One rules while the others sleep, maintaining Coven stability. Victor's reign ends in 6 months when Marcus takes over. Except Marcus is already awake, Blade noted. Saw him personally. He wanted my blood for some hybrid experiment. Lucian's expression darkened. Then Victor broke the covenant. Awakened Marcus early because he sees you as either threat or opportunity too valuable to wait. He pulled out a detailed schematic of a Gothic fortress. This is Ordahaz, Victor's stronghold, 14 centuries of fortification, hundreds of death dealers, and enough defensive measures to withstand anything short of nuclear assault. You've tried attacking it, Blade observed. 17 times over 60 years, Lucian admitted. Lost hundreds of my people. Victor's defenses are impenetrable, and even if we breach them, he retreats to his stone sarcophagus, impervious to everything except sunlight, Blade finished. Open the coffin during day. Let the sun do the work, which requires getting past his death dealers, his security systems, and his personal guard while he's at full strength during night operations. Lucian's frustration was evident. We've never come close. Victor always knows we're coming, always has countermeasures. Blade studied the schematics with a hunter's eye. What about during the changing of the guard? When one elder goes to sleep and another wakes? That's got to create vulnerability. The awakening ceremony, Selene said quietly, her tactical mind engaging despite emotional trauma. 3 nights from now, Victor will begin his hibernation ritual while Marcus fully awakens and assumes control. For approximately 6 hours, both elders are vulnerable, Victor weakened by the ritual, Marcus not yet at full strength. Lucian's eyes lit with predatory interest. You know the ceremony's details. I've attended 3 of them. Different elders, same process. Selene looked up from the family portrait she still held. Victor never thought I'd betray him. I know every security protocol, every defensive measure, every contingency. And you'd help us? Lucian asked carefully. Help destroy the vampire who raised you, trained you, gave you purpose for 6 centuries? Selene's voice was cold as winter. He murdered my family and made me worship him for it. Yes, Lucian, I'll help you kill Victor. Blade held up a hand. Hold on. I'm not here to fight your war. I need to find the Crimson Chalice, an artifact that crossed dimensional barriers. Once I locate it, I'm gone. It's back to my world, my hunt. And if the chalice is in Victor's vault, Lucian countered, Ortegaz contains the greatest collection of mystical artifacts in Eastern Europe. If your chalice entered this world, Victor would have claimed it immediately. Anything with power becomes his property. Blade's jaw tightened. Of course, the artifact would be in the one place most heavily defended. Then I need a way in. Not to kill Victor. That's your obsession. Just to retrieve what's mine. The awakening ceremony is our best chance, Lucian pressed. Victor's guards will be focused on the ritual, his attention divided. We create a distraction. You slip in during the chaos. Find your chalice. We all get what we want. And when Victor's entire coven comes down on us? Blade asked. Lucian smiled, and for the first time, Blade saw the predator beneath the revolutionary. Then we remind them that Lykans aren't slaves anymore, that we've spent 60 years preparing for this moment, that we have allies now, a daywalker who wounded an elder, and a death dealer who knows every secret of their stronghold. One of the Lykan guards burst into the war room, his expression urgent. Lucian, Death Dealer Patrol found our western entrance. They're not attacking, they're delivering a message. From Victor? Lucian asked. From Marcus. They moved to the stronghold's main chamber where a single death dealer stood surrounded by dozens of armed Lykans. She held no weapon, just a sealed letter bearing Marcus's ancient seal. When she saw Selene, hatred blazed in her eyes, but she maintained professional composure. The first vampire sends terms, she announced formally. Amber for the daywalker called Blade. Blade took the letter, breaking the wax seal. Inside, elegant script that predated modern language. Daywalker, you possess what I have sought for a millennium. Perfected fusion of vampire and human, daywalking ability without weakness. Victor sees you as threat to destroy. I see you as evolution to embrace. I offer partnership. Your blood willingly given, my knowledge of the core vinous strain shared. Together we could create a new species, vampires who walk in sunlight, immune to our ancient weaknesses, superior to both mortal and immortal. Victor's reign ends in 3 nights. When I awaken fully, I will rule the covens without his outdated morality or pathetic attachment to order. Join me, and I will give you power beyond imagination. Refuse, and I will take your blood anyway, although the extraction will be unpleasant. The Crimson Chalice you seek is indeed in Ortegaz's vault. Victor claims all artifacts of power. Serve me, and it's yours. Defy me, and you'll die never knowing what it was meant to do. Choose wisely, Daywalker. Evolution waits for no one. Marcus Corvinus, first among vampires. Blade handed the letter to Lucian. So Victor wants me dead or enslaved, and Marcus wants me as a science experiment. Anyone else want to make offers? I want Victor dead and my people free, Lucian said simply. What you do after that is your business. But I won't pretend friendship, Daywalker. You hunt vampires, fine. You're indifferent to Lykans, I understand. But if you help us kill Victor, I'll ensure you leave this world alive with your chalice. Selene spoke up, her voice steady despite the trauma of revelation. Marcus is lying. The chalice isn't in the main vault. It would be in Victor's personal collection, accessible only during the awakening ceremony when security protocols change. I've seen the inventory lists. If the chalice arrived recently, Victor would have claimed it immediately and locked it in his private sanctum. Then we're all going to the same place for different reasons, Blade concluded. He looked at Lucian, then at Selene, then at the assembled Lykans who watched this alliance of desperation form. I want my artifact. You want Victor dead. Selene wants revenge. Marcus wants to play God with vampire genetics. He checked his weapons, calculating odds and angles. 3 nights to prepare. A fortress designed to be impregnable. 2 elder vampires, hundreds of death dealers, being in a ceremony that would create vulnerability, if they could survive long enough to exploit it. All right, Blade said finally. I'll help you kill Victor. But when it's done, I take my chalice and leave. No revolution, no war, no picking sides in your eternal bullshit. We clear? Lucian extended his hand, human in that moment, not Lykan. Crystal clear, Daywalker. Blade shook it, sealing an alliance born of necessity rather than trust. Above them, dawn finally broke over Budapest. Victor retreated to his stone sarcophagus, his chest wound healing, his rage meticulously controlled. He had 3 nights to prepare his defenses, to secure his vault, to ensure that when the awakening ceremony began, any who dared challenge him would face the full might of 14 centuries of accumulated power. And in the shadows of Ortogaz, Marcus smiled with a mouth still regenerating from Blade's UV grenade. The Daywalker had made his choice, defiance over cooperation, which meant Marcus would take what he needed by force and enjoy every moment of the extraction. The war was no longer between vampires and Lykans. It had become something more dangerous, a 3-way collision between ancient tyranny, desperate revolution, and a hunter who served no master but his own relentless purpose. 3 nights until the awakening ceremony. 3 nights to prepare for an assault that would either destroy Victor's reign or prove that some monsters truly were unkillable. The next 3 nights were a masterclass in guerrilla preparation. Lucian's Lycan resistance had spent 60 years accumulating weapons, intelligence, and tactical expertise, but they'd never had access to a death dealer who knew Ortogaz's security protocols or a daywalker who'd perfected vampire extermination into a lethal science. Blade worked in the Stronghold's armory, a converted bunker where Lycans manufactured silver ammunition and UV weaponry reverse-engineered from captured death dealer equipment. He watched a young Lycan technician, couldn't have been more than 19, carefully measuring silver nitrate concentrations for armor-piercing rounds. "You're doing it wrong," Blade said, startling the kid. "Silver concentration's too low. Won't penetrate death dealer tactical leather at that ratio." The technician bristled. "I've been making these for 3 years." Blade took the mixing container and adjusted the formula with practiced efficiency, adding compounds the Lycans had never considered. 3 years of making ammunition that wounds instead of kills. Ancient vampires heal fast. You want them dead before they recover. He handed back the corrected mixture. "Try that ratio. Test it on captured armor." The technician did, and the rounds punched clean through leather that had previously deflected like an ammunition. Word spread quickly. Within hours, Blade was training Lycan weapon specialists in techniques Whistler had spent decades perfecting. UV grenade configurations, acid-etched silver that caused catastrophic healing failures, stake placement for instant heart destruction. "You're teaching them how to kill your own kind," Selene observed, watching from the armory entrance. Her wounds from the garage fight had healed, but her eyes carried the hollow look of someone whose entire worldview had shattered. "I'm teaching them how to kill vampires efficiently," Blade corrected, not looking up from the weapon maintenance he was performing. "Not my kind. I'm human who happens to have vampire traits." "There's a difference." "Is there?" She moved closer, studying the arsenal he'd helped optimize. "You drink blood to survive. You have enhanced strength, speed, healing. You're functionally immortal. What makes you different from Victor or Marcus besides which side you chose?" Blade finally met her gaze. "I chose. That's the difference. Victor was turned and decided to build an empire of slaves. Marcus became a vampire and wanted to play God with bloodlines. I was born this way and decided to hunt the things that prey on humans." He returned to his work. "A choice defines us more than biology." Selene was quiet for a moment. "I'm 600 years old and I've never made a real choice until 3 nights ago. Victor decided everything. Who I killed, who I protected, what I believed. I was a weapon who thought she was a warrior." "Now you're a warrior who knows she was a weapon," Blade replied. "What you do with that knowledge is your choice. First real one you've made." Across the stronghold, Lucian coordinated with his lieutenants over a 3-dimensional hologram of Ortogaz that Selene had helped construct from memory. The fortress was a Gothic monstrosity built over 14 centuries. Layers of medieval stonework reinforced with modern security systems, UV-shielded chambers for daylight operations, and a central spire where the awakening ceremony would occur. Two of the ceremony chambers here, Selene indicated the spire's apex. Victor's sarcophagus in the eastern alcove, Marcus's in the western. During the ritual, both elders are sedated by ancient magic, Victor entering hibernation, Marcus achieving full awakening, the 6-hour window where both are vulnerable. Ray's, Lucian's scarred lieutenant, studied the layout. Death dealer presence? Minimum 40 in the ceremony chamber alone, Selene replied. Another 100 throughout the fortress, plus Victor's personal guard. 12 ancient vampires nearly as old as him, fanatically loyal. And Marcus's loyalists, Lucian added grimly. The first vampire has his own faction who see Victor as obsolete. They'll be protecting Marcus during his vulnerable awakening. So we're fighting two armies that hate each other, but will temporarily unite to kill us, Ray summarized. Fantastic odds. We don't fight them, Blade interjected, joining the strategic session. We avoid them. Guerrilla tactics. Hit fast, hit hard, extract before they can coordinate response. He pointed to the fortress's lower levels. Selene, you said Victor's private sanctum is accessible during protocol changes. Where? She highlighted a chamber 3 levels below the ceremony room. Here, his personal vault, magically sealed except during elder transitions when the enchantments shift. 6-hour window, same as the awakening ceremony. Then we split into 3 teams, Blade outlined. Team 1, Lucian, and the main Lykan force, creates chaos at the fortress perimeter. It will maximum noise, maximum threat, draw Death Dealer resources away from the ceremony. Lucian nodded, following the logic. We've spent 60 years harassing their patrols. They'll expect a major assault during the ceremony vulnerability. We give them what they expect. Team 2, Selene and a small strike force, infiltrates to the ceremony chamber, Blade continued. Your objective isn't to kill Victor during the ritual. You can't. He's too protected. Your objective is to ensure Marcus doesn't fully awaken. Keep the first vampire vulnerable. Prevent him from becoming the threat he promises. Selene's tactical mind immediately grasped the strategy. Interrupt the awakening ritual. Without full resurrection, Marcus remains weakened. Gives us time to let me do what I do best, Blade finished. Team 3 is me, alone. Hitting Victor's sanctum during the chaos. I find the crimson chalice, extract, and on my way out, I open Victor's sarcophagus to sunlight. Elder vampire plus UV exposure equals ash. You can't carry enough UV equipment to penetrate his sarcophagus shielding, Reyes objected. The thing's designed to protect him from nuclear strikes. Blade smiled without humor. I'm not using UV grenades. I'm using the sun itself. He pulled out a device he'd been constructing in the armory, a shaped charge designed to blow through the ceremony chamber's UV-reinforced ceiling. Detonate this at dawn, and natural sunlight floods the chamber. Victor's sarcophagus protections are designed for artificial UV, not actual daylight. Lucian stared at the device with something approaching awe. That's elegantly vicious. That's suicide, Selene countered. Money, the explosion will alert every death dealer in the fortress. You'll have seconds before they converge on your position. Then I better move fast, Blade replied. The planning continued through the night. Entry points, fallback positions, communication protocols. The Lykans contributed knowledge of Budapest's underground tunnels that connected to Ortegaz's foundation. Selene provided death dealer patrol patterns and security override codes. Blade calculated weapon loadouts and extraction timelines with the precision of someone who'd planned hundreds of vampire raids. By the second night, the Alliance had transformed from desperate gamble to coordinated military operation. Lykans trained in close-quarters combat against vampire speed. Selene drilled Lykan infiltrators on death dealer tactics and responses. A Blade manufactured enough specialized ammunition to arm a small war. It was during a rare moment of rest that Selene found Blade on the stronghold's upper level, watching Budapest's nighttime skyline through a reinforced observation port. The blood moon had faded, replaced by normal lunar cycle, but the city still felt wrong to him. Too controlled, too silent, the weight of Victor's dominion pressing down on every street. "You're thinking about home," Selene said, not a question. "Thinking about Whistler?" Blade admitted. "Old man who raised me, taught me everything I know about hunting. Died getting me the intel that led to that portal." He was quiet for a moment. "Died so I could find the chalice and stop whatever the vampire cult was planning with it." "What were they planning?" "Don't know. Whistler's message was encrypted, incomplete. Just said the chalice could unmake the barrier between worlds and had to be destroyed before they completed the ritual." Blade's jaw tightened. "But I was too late. They activated it, the portal opened, and I got sucked through into your fucked up vampire aristocracy." Selene leaned against the concrete wall. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choice defining us more than biology." She turned to face him. "For 600 years, I chose nothing. Victor chose, and I obeyed. I killed Lykans because he said they were monsters. Never asked if he was the real monster. And now? Now I'm choosing to destroy the creature who made me what I am," she said simply. "Choosing to help you because you showed me that vampires don't have to be parasites or tyrants. That someone with our power can choose to protect instead of prey." Blade removed his sunglasses, a rare gesture that revealed eyes carrying centuries of hybrid isolation. "Don't romanticize what I am, Selene. I'm not a hero. I hunt vampires because it's what I was made for, what I'm good at. The fact that it helps humans is convenient bonus, not primary motivation." "You're a weapon who chose his own target," Selene replied. "That's more heroic than 6 centuries of following orders ever was." Before Blade could respond, alarms blared through the stronghold. Lycans scrambled to defensive positions as monitors showed movement at the tunnel entrances. Not death dealers, but something worse. Marcus had sent his personal servants, not vampires but ghouls, humans addicted to vampire blood. They granted minor regeneration and strength in exchange for absolute servitude. 50 of them, armed with flamethrowers and explosive charges, advancing through the tunnels with suicidal determination. "He's probing our defenses," Lucian snarled, joining them at the command center. "Wants to know our strength before the ceremony." "Or he's delivering a message," Blade said, watching the monitors. The ghouls weren't advancing tactically. They were marching in formation, carrying something between them. A coffin. The stronghold's main entrance exploded inward as the ghouls breached the outer defenses. Lycans opened fire, silver rounds cutting through servant flesh. But the ghouls kept coming with drug-fueled fanaticism. They reached the central chamber and placed the coffin reverently before retreating into the tunnels, leaving explosive charges that collapsed the entrance behind them. Silence fell. The coffin sat in the chamber's center, ancient wood carved with symbols that predated written language. Slowly the lid opened from within. A woman sat up, her movements graceful despite obvious physical trauma. She'd been beautiful once. Dark hair, aristocratic features. But her body bore signs of systematic torture. Burns, cuts, broken bones poorly healed. She wore the tattered remains of a death dealer uniform. "Erica," Selene whispered, recognizing Victor's former consort. "Victor's lover. She disappeared 6 months ago after questioning his judgment." Erica's voice was raw from screaming. "Selene! The great death dealer! Victor's perfect weapon!" She laughed, a sound brittle with madness. "He knows you're here, knows you betrayed him, sent me to deliver his message." "What message?" Lucian demanded. "That rebellion has consequences," Erica replied. "That Victor is eternal, patient, and absolutely without mercy." Her hand trembled as she pulled a device from the coffin, a dead man's switch connected to explosives throughout her body. "Marcus improved me, made me a weapon one last time. I die, the charges detonate, enough explosive to collapse this entire bunker." "Why are you telling us this?" Blade asked calmly, his hand already moving toward his sword. "Because Victor gave me a choice," Erica said, tears streaming down her tortured face. "Detonate immediately and kill everyone, earning quick death. Or warn you first and die slowly, but take Selene with me as consolation prize." Her eyes locked on Selene. "He wants you to know that betraying him means everyone you care about suffers, that there's no escape from his reach, that he'll make you watch everyone die before he grants you the mercy of final death." Selene's hand went to her weapon, but Blade was faster. His sword flashed once, severing Erica's hand at the wrist before she could release the switch. The device clattered to the floor, still depressed by dead fingers. Erica screamed, collapsing. "Lykans! Evacuate!" Lucian roared. "She's rigged!" "I've got this," Blade interrupted, examining the device with a bomb technician's focus. Whistler had taught him demolitions alongside vampire hunting. Never knew when you'd need to blow up a blood bank or disarm a vampire cult's explosive trap. His enhanced vision traced the wiring. Complex, but not impossible. Marcus had designed it for psychological impact more than actual lethality. Wanted the slow terror of watching a countdown, not instant obliteration. Blade's hands moved with surgical precision, his vampire speed allowing micro-adjustments that would take human bomb squads hours. 30 seconds later, he'd isolated the primary detonator and severed it from the backup triggers. Erica stared at him with fading consciousness. "Impossible. Marcus said it couldn't be disarmed." "Marcus underestimated me," Blade replied, applying a tourniquet to her severed wrist. "Seems to be a pattern with you ancient vampires. You're so used to being top predators, you forget that evolution creates new threats." Lucian's medics took Erica into custody, rushing her to medical facilities. She'd survive, barely, but her message had been delivered. The victor knew where they were, knew their plans, and wanted them to understand that he controlled this game, despite appearing vulnerable. "We move up the timeline," Blade decided. "Tomorrow night, don't give Victor time to fortify further or plan additional psychological warfare." "We're not ready," Reyes protested. "We need at least one more night of preparation." "We're never ready to fight 14th-century-old vampires," Blade cut him off. But Victor just showed his hand. "He's worried enough about us to waste resources on a terror message. That means we're a real threat. We press the advantage before he adapts." Lucian studied Blade's expression, seeing the cold tactical assessment beneath. "You've done this before, adapted on the fly. Air struck when enemies expected delay." "I've fought vampire cults that controlled entire cities," Blade confirmed. "Dracula's descendants who thought themselves untouchable. Ancient bloodlines that predated Christianity. They all made the same mistake. Thought time was on their side. That patience and planning guaranteed victory." His hand tightened on his sword. "But time is just another weapon. And sometimes the best tactic is moving so fast your enemy can't adjust." Selene looked at the blood on the floor where Erica had collapsed, at the explosives Blade had disarmed, at the message Victor had sent through torture and terror. 600 years of loyalty, shattered in 3 days. 600 years of service, repaid with threats against everyone she might care about. "Tomorrow night," she agreed, her voice cold as winter. "We end Victor's reign. We end the lies. We end this war." The Lykans began final preparations, weapons checks, tunnel mapping, tactical drills. The stronghold transformed into a military operation on the eve of assault. Young Lykans who'd never known freedom prepared to fight for it. Veterans who'd lost everything to vampire oppression readied themselves for one final strike. And in Ortegaz, Victor received word that his message had been delivered. He smiled in his private chamber, surrounded by 14 centuries of accumulated artifacts and power. Let them come tomorrow. Let them rage against order itself. He would demonstrate what true immortality meant, not simply existing forever, but crushing every challenge, adapting to every threat, remaining eternally victorious. Marcus, in his awakening chamber, he felt the approach of his full resurrection. One more night of weakness, then absolute power. The Daywalker's blood would be his, the Covens would bow to evolution, and Victor's outdated morality would be replaced with Marcus's vision of perfected vampire supremacy. None of them, not Victor, not Marcus, not even Lucian, truly understood what they'd awakened by bringing Blade into their war. They were about to learn that some hunters didn't just kill monsters. Some hunters became the nightmare that monsters feared. The final night before the assault, Blade found himself unable to sleep despite his body's need for rest. The stronghold buzzed with controlled tension, Lykans performing last equipment checks, Selene reviewing infiltration routes one final time, Lucian giving quiet encouragement to fighters who might not survive tomorrow. Blade stood in the armory, methodically loading his final magazine with silver rounds, when a young Lykan approached. Couldn't have been more than 16, her eyes still holding traces of humanity that the older warriors had lost to decades of war. "You're really going in alone?" she asked, her voice carrying a Hungarian accent softened by youth. "Into Victor's sanctum? With no backup?" "Works better that way," Blade replied without looking up. "Don't have to worry about anyone else's survival. Just my mission." "That's sad," the girl said simply. "Fighting alone, I mean. We fight together. Pack protects pack." Blade finally met her gaze. "What's your name?" "Sonia," she replied, and Blade saw Selene stiffen across the armory at the name. "My mother named me after Victor's daughter, the one he murdered for loving a Lykan. It said I should remember that even monsters can love, and even love can be punished." The original Sonia, the vampire princess whose execution had sparked 60 years of war. Blade had heard the story from Lucian during planning sessions. Victor's own daughter burned alive in daylight for the crime of loving across species lines, for carrying a hybrid child that represented everything Victor's rigid order couldn't tolerate. "Your mother chose a heavy name to carry," Blade observed. Young Sonia smiled without bitterness. "She died in a death dealer raid when I was 8, but before that, she told me stories about how the war started with love and ended with hate, how Victor could have chosen differently, could have embraced his daughter's child, could have seen hybrids as evolution instead of abomination." Her eyes glowed amber for a moment. She said maybe one day someone would show Victor that different doesn't mean wrong, that hybrid doesn't mean monster. Blade understood what she was implying. "I'm not here to teach Victor philosophy lessons. I'm here to get my artifact and leave." "But you'll kill him if you get the chance," Sonia said, not a question. "You'll open his coffin to sunlight and watch him burn." "Yes. Good." Her voice carried steel beneath youth. "Because some monsters deserve to burn. Not because they're vampires or Lycans or hybrids. Because they chose cruelty when they could have chosen mercy." She left Blade with that thought, returning to her unit. Selene approached, having overheard the exchange. "Her mother was Elena," Selene said quietly. "One of the Lycans I killed 12 years ago, out during a tunnel raid." Her voice held something Blade hadn't heard before. Genuine remorse. "I didn't know she had a daughter. Didn't ask. Just followed Victor's orders and moved to the next target." "And now you're fighting alongside that daughter to kill the vampire who gave you those orders," Blade observed. "That's some heavy irony." "That's justice," Selene corrected. "Imperfect, complicated justice. But justice nonetheless." She paused. "When we're inside Ordogaz tomorrow, when the chaos starts and everything goes wrong, because it will go wrong, I need you to promise me something." "I don't make promises." "Promise anyway," she insisted. "If it comes down to choosing between the chalice and stopping Victor, choose Victor. Whatever that artifact does, whatever power it represents, it can't be worse than letting that monster continue ruling." Blade studied her face, seeing 6 centuries of conditioning warring with 3 days of truth. "You're asking me to prioritize your revenge over my mission?" "I'm asking you to recognize that some monsters create more monsters," Selene replied. "Victor has spent 14 centuries building an empire of blood and lies. How many death dealers like me did he create? How many families did he destroy to make weapons? How many Elenas died following his orders, leaving daughters behind to inherit the war?" Before Blade could respond, Lucian's voice echoed through the Stronghold's communication system. "All teams, final briefing in 10 minutes. This is it." The war room filled quickly. Out of 200 Lycans, the entire fighting strength of the resistance, crowded into the converted bunker. Veterans who'd fought for decades stood beside teenagers who'd only known war. Families, lovers, friends, all preparing to assault a fortress that had never fallen in 14 centuries. Lucian stood before them, his presence commanding absolute attention. "Tomorrow night, Victor performs the awakening ceremony. For 6 hours, both elders are vulnerable. For 6 hours, the Coven's leadership is divided. For 6 hours, we have a chance to end the war our ancestors started." He gestured to the holographic display. "Team Alpha, 150 fighters under Reyes' command, will assault the fortress perimeter at midnight. Your objective is maximum chaos. Make them think we're throwing everything at the walls. Draw death dealer forces away from internal defense. Reyes nodded, his scarred face grim with determination. Team Beta, 30 infiltrators under my personal command, will breach through the eastern tunnels during the perimeter chaos. We'll establish positions in the fortress lower levels, cutting off Death Dealer reinforcements and securing our extraction route. Lucian's eyes found Selene. Team Gamma, Selene plus 5 Lykan specialists, will infiltrate to the ceremony chamber. Your mission is to interrupt Marcus's awakening. The first vampire cannot be allowed to reach full power. Use whatever means necessary. Selene's strike team stepped forward, elite Lykans who trained specifically for vampire assassination. They looked at her with mixture of distrust and grudging respect. She'd killed their people for 6 centuries, but now she offered them the one thing they'd never had: intimate knowledge of how to hurt the creatures who'd enslaved them. Team Delta, Lucian continued, his voice dropping slightly, is Blade. Solo insertion during the chaos. Mission: retrieve the Crimson Chalice from Victor's sanctum, and if opportunity presents, eliminate the Elder. 200 Lycan eyes turned to Blade. He stood apart from them, neither part of their pack nor truly allied with their cause. An outsider, a hybrid who hunted his own kind. A hunter who promised nothing beyond completing his personal mission. I know what you're thinking, Blade addressed the assembled Lycans directly. Why trust the vampire? Why believe he'll actually help us instead of just grabbing his artifact and running? Silence. That was exactly what they were thinking. You shouldn't trust me, Blade continued bluntly. I'm not here for your freedom or your revenge. I'm here because my mentor died getting me intel about that chalice. Because a vampire cult in my world opened a portal for some apocalyptic ritual. Because I hunt monsters, and your war put the biggest monsters in one convenient location. He met their eyes without flinching. But here's the truth. Victor represents everything I've spent 30 years killing. Ancient vampire who thinks his age makes him untouchable. Aristocrat who built power on enslaved blood. Tyrant who murders anyone who threatens his control. Blade's hand rested on his sword. I was going to kill things like him, whether you asked me to or not. Your revolution just gives me convenient cover. Lucian almost smiled. Refreshingly honest. Daywalker. I don't do inspiring speeches, Blade replied. I do body counts. Victor's about to become part of mine. The briefing continued with detailed tactical coordination, radio frequencies, recognition signals, fallback positions. The plan was complex, with multiple failure points and contingencies, but it had something previous Lycan assaults had lacked. Insider knowledge from Selene and devastating efficiency from Blade's weapons expertise. As the teams dispersed to their final preparations, Reyes approached Blade privately. Question, Daywalker. When you're in that sanctum, alone, with the chalice in your hands, what stops you from just leaving? You can move in daylight. You don't need our extraction. What guarantees you'll actually help kill Victor instead of disappearing? Blade considered the question seriously. Nothing guarantees it, but I've learned something hunting vampires for 3 decades. When you let ancient monsters survive because it's tactically convenient, they always come back worse. Victor knows I exist now, knows I can hurt elders. If I leave him alive, he'll spend the next century hunting me, studying me, finding ways to counter my abilities. He checked his weapons one final time. So I'll kill him because it's the smart tactical choice. Because monsters who know about you are more dangerous than monsters you've eliminated. Not heroism, Reyes. Just survival instinct. Reyes studied him for a long moment. You know what I think, Daywalker? I think you tell yourself it's all tactics and survival because caring about the people you save makes you vulnerable, makes you human. He clasped Blade's shoulder, a gesture of pack solidarity. But you taught young Lycans how to kill vampires efficiently. You disarmed Erica's bombs to save strangers. You're fighting a war that isn't yours because it's the right thing to do. Don't make me regret helping you, Blade warned. Too late, Reyes grinned, fangs showing. You're already part of this pack, whether you admit it or not. The final hours before midnight crawled by. Blade spent them in meditation, centering himself the way Whistler had taught him. Clear the mind, focus on the mission, become the weapon. No fear, no hesitation, just purpose refined to its sharpest edge. Selene found him in the armory one last time. I've been thinking about what you said, about choice defining us more than biology. And, and I'm choosing to trust you, she said simply, choosing to believe that the daywalker who saved Lykan children from explosives, who taught resistance fighters how to defend themselves, who showed a 600-year-old vampire that loyalty can be questioned, I'm choosing to believe that daywalker will do the right thing when it matters. Blade stood, adjusting his coat. The right thing is subjective. I'm doing my thing. If it happens to align with your revolution, great. If not, then I'll deal with the consequences, Selene finished. But Blade, thank you for showing me that vampires don't have to be what Victor made us, that we can choose differently. Before he could respond, the Stronghold's alarm system activated, not in warning, but in coordination. Midnight had arrived. The awakening ceremony had begun in Ordogaz's highest chamber. Victor entering his century of hibernation, Marcus emerging from his 6 hours, that's all they had. All teams, move out, Lucian's voice commanded. For 60 years we fought in shadows. Tonight we bring the war to their fortress. Tonight we remind them that slaves can break their chains. Tonight we end Victor's reign. The Lykan war cry echoed through the stronghold, a sound mixing human rage with wolf fury. 60 years of suffering crystallized into singular purpose. 200 fighters poured into the tunnels, heading toward a fortress that had never fallen, toward enemies who thought themselves immortal. Blade moved with them, separate but parallel. His path would diverge once they reached Ordogaz. While they fought on the walls and in the halls, he'd descend into Victor's private sanctum, into the vault where 14 centuries of plundered artifacts awaited, where the crimson chalice rested, holding secrets about dimensional barriers and apocalyptic rituals, where Victor's sleeping form would be vulnerable to the one thing his ancient power couldn't protect against, the rising sun. The assault on Ordogaz had begun, and the Gothic fortress that had stood unconquered for 14 centuries was about to learn that some nights the hunters became the hunted. Above ground, death dealers patrolled Budapest streets, unaware that beneath their feet, an army of Lykans was converging on their stronghold. In the ceremony chamber, Victor's eyes closed for the final time before hibernation, his last conscious thought confident that his fortress was impregnable, his power eternal. He was wrong. The war was about to change forever. The assault began with fire. Reyes' Alpha team hit Ordogaz's perimeter with concentrated fury. Silver-loaded rockets, UV floodlights powered by hijacked electrical substations, and incendiary grenades that turned the Gothic fortress's outer courtyards into blazing killing zones. 150 Lykans in full combat transformation, their supernatural strength allowing them to carry heavy weapons that would cripple normal humans. Death dealers responded with professional efficiency, pouring from defensive positions with UV rifles and silver nitrate ammunition. The night erupted into a firefight that lit Budapest's sky with tracer rounds and explosions. Exactly as planned. Maximum chaos, maximum attention. Every death dealer eye turned toward the walls. While the fortress burned above, Blade descended. And the eastern tunnels that Lucian's beta team used for insertion branched into older passages, medieval sewers that predated Ordogaz itself, constructed when Budapest was still Buda and Pest separated by the Danube. Selene had marked the route during planning, a forgotten maintenance shaft that connected to Victor's sanctum through layers of stone the Elder had never bothered to reinforce because he thought no one knew they existed. He'd never accounted for a death dealer memorizing every blueprint over 6 centuries of service, then turning that knowledge against him. Blade moved through absolute darkness, his vampire vision rendering the ancient stonework in shades of gray and silver. Water dripped somewhere distant. The air tasted of age and forgotten things. His enhanced hearing tracked the battle 3 levels above. Gunfire, screams, the distinctive crack of silver rounds meeting vampire flesh. The tunnel terminated at a steel door bearing Victor's personal seal, a stylized V wrapped in thorns, the symbol that had marked 14 centuries of dominion. Selene's security codes should bypass the electronic lock. Should, if Victor hadn't changed them after her betrayal. Blade entered the 12-digit sequence. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the lock disengaged with a pneumatic hiss that sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. The sanctum beyond defied expectation. Blade had raided vampire lairs across 3 continents, opulent blood banks, medieval crypts, modern penthouses adapted for immortal residents. But Victor's private collection existed on a different scale entirely. The chamber stretched the length of a football field, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows 40 feet above. Display cases lined the walls, each containing artifacts that pulsed with residual power. Ancient weapons, mystical tomes, religious relics corrupted for vampiric purposes. And at the chamber's center, a vault within the vault, a crystalline enclosure that refracted light into impossible patterns. Inside, arranged on pedestals of black marble, were the artifacts Victor considered too dangerous or valuable for general storage. The crimson chalice sat among them, and Blade's hybrid senses recognized it immediately. The artifact was smaller than expected, barely larger than a wine glass, constructed from what looked like crystallized blood. But it radiated wrongness, a dimensional instability that made reality warp slightly around its presence. This thing could unmake barriers between worlds, could tear holes in dimensional fabric, and some vampire cult in Blade's home universe had wanted it badly enough to kill Whistler and dozens of others. He approached the crystalline vault carefully, every instinct screaming warnings. Too easy. Victor was 14 centuries old. He didn't leave his most valuable possessions behind simple glass, even during the awakening ceremony's chaos. Blade's suspicions proved correct when he noticed the pressure plates beneath each pedestal, the tripwires running through the display cases, the magical sigils carved into the floor that would trigger the moment someone, without Victor's specific blood signature, crossed them. "Fuck," Blade muttered, studying the security with a bomb technician's focus. Mechanical traps he could handle, cut the wires, disable the pressure sensors. But magical wards required different expertise, the kind Whistler had dabbled in but never mastered. Above, the battle intensified. Blade's enhanced hearing picked up Lucian's voice over the radio. "Beta team in position. Gamma team. Status?" Selene's response came through. "Approaching ceremony chamber. Heavy death dealer presence. Marcus's loyalists are protecting his awakening. Encountering resistance." "Proceed as planned," Lucian commanded. Increase pressure on the western wall. Draw more forces away from..." The transmission dissolved into static as something disrupted communications. Blade recognized the interference pattern. Victor's fortress had electronic countermeasures, and someone had just activated them. The operation was already deviating from plan. He returned his focus to the vault. Magical wards or not, he needed that chalice. The question was how to bypass protections designed by an elder vampire without triggering every alarm in the fortress. "Innovative problem-solving required," a voice said from the shadows, cultured and ancient. "I do appreciate watching predators work." Blade spun, weapons drawn, to find an impossibly old vampire emerging from a concealed alcove. Not Victor. This creature was different, his features refined by ages beyond counting, his clothing a mixture of medieval robes and modern affectation. Tannis, Blade recognized from Selene's descriptions. The exiled historian. "The same," Tannis acknowledged, studying Blade with scholarly interest. "Though exiled implies I left against my will. In truth, I found Victor's court tediously dogmatic. Out here, I can pursue knowledge without his tedious moral restrictions." He gestured to the vault. "Attempting to steal from an elder. Bold. Suicidal, but bold. You going to try and stop me?" "Stop you? Dear boy, I'm going to help you." Tannis smiled, revealing fangs yellowed with age. "Victor exiled me for researching forbidden knowledge, specifically the true history of the Corvinus strain and the hybrids he executed to maintain his pure bloodline dogma. Any enemy of Victor's rigid ideology is a potential ally." Blade kept his weapons ready. "What's your price?" "Information," Tannis replied simply. "You're a hybrid unlike anything I've encountered. Daywalking ability without the Corvinus strain's instability, vampire traits without their weaknesses. I want to know what you are, how you came to exist, and whether your biology could be replicated." "Pass," Blade said flatly. I'm not anyone's science experiment. Then enjoy Victor's magical wards, Tannis shrugged, turning to leave. They're designed to recognize only his blood signature. Anyone else who touches those pedestals will trigger a UV flood that turns this entire chamber into an incinerator. Even you, Daywalker, wouldn't survive that concentration. Blade calculated odds. Trust the ancient vampire who wanted to study his biology or try to bypass magical wards he didn't fully understand. Both options were terrible, but one offered a chance of success. Fine, he decided. You help me get the chalice, I answer 3 questions. Not about how to replicate my biology, I don't know that anyway, but about what I am and where I came from. Tannis's eyes gleamed with scholarly hunger. Unacceptable. 3 questions, truthfully answered. He approached the vault, producing a vial of dark liquid from his robes. This is Victor's blood, extracted during a previous century when I still had access to the Coven's resources. Aged, but viable for magical purposes. He daubed the blood onto his fingertips and traced it across the vault's seals. The magical wards flickered, recognizing the signature, temporarily neutralized. You have approximately 90 seconds before the blood oxidizes and the wards reactivate. I suggest moving quickly. Blade didn't waste time questioning. He smashed through the crystalline barrier with his reinforced glove, grabbed the crimson chalice from its pedestal, and retreated before the security could compensate. And the chamber's lights flickered red, proximity alarms triggering despite Tannis's bypass, but the UV flood didn't activate. Fascinating, Tannis observed, studying Blade with clinical interest. Your movements exhibited speed beyond standard vampire reflexes. Enhanced by what precisely? Hybrid vigor? Genetic optimization? Divine intervention? Question 1 already? Blade secured the chalice in his coat's reinforced interior pocket. I'm half vampire, half human. Mother was bitten while pregnant. The vampire enzyme bonded with my developing fetus. Got vampire strengths without most of their weaknesses. No one designed it, just genetic accident. Remarkable, Tannis breathed. Natural hybridization without the Corvinus strain. Victor would have killed you immediately if he'd known such a thing was possible. Threatened his entire ideology about bloodline purity. He gestured toward the chamber's exit. We should leave before his security forces investigate the alarm. They moved quickly through the sanctum, Blade already calculating his next objective. The chalice was secured, primary mission accomplished. But above them, the awakening ceremony continued. Victor entering hibernation, vulnerable for the first time in a century. The opportunity was too perfect to ignore. Where's Victor's sarcophagus during the ceremony? Blade demanded. The awakening chamber, naturally, Tannis replied. Why, you're actually planning to attempt assassination during the ritual. That's magnificently ambitious. Just tactical, Blade corrected, but he was already moving toward the upper levels. The radio crackled back to life as they ascended. Under heavy fire. Marcus's awakening is accelerating. He's conscious already. Shouldn't be possible. Selene's voice strained and desperate. Blade's enhanced hearing picked up weapon fire in the background, screaming, the distinctive sound of Lykan transformation. Gamma team, fall back, Lucian's command. Beta team, provide covering fire. Shit, they've got flamethrowers. The assault was deteriorating faster than expected. Marcus awakening early meant the first vampire was at partial strength already, no longer vulnerable. Victor's death dealers were coordinating better than predicted. The Lykan revolution was being slaughtered in the halls of Ortegas. Blade reached a junction point, left led to the awakening chamber where he could potentially kill Victor. While right led to Gamma Team's position where Selene and the Lykans were being overwhelmed by Marcus's forces. Mission versus mercy. The chalice versus the people who'd helped him. Choose quickly, Daywalker, Tannis advised, reading his hesitation. Victor's hibernation is nearly complete. If you're going to kill him, it must be in the next 10 minutes. But your allies are dying right now. You cannot save both. Blade's hand tightened on his sword. 30 years of hunting had taught him that hesitation killed. That attachment was weakness. That the mission always came first because completing it saved more lives than individual rescue operations. But he thought of young Sonia, carrying a name that represented hope despite tragedy, of Ray's scarred face and grudging respect. of Selene choosing to question 6 centuries of conditioning, or of 200 Lykans fighting for freedom against impossible odds, of Whistler's voice. Sometimes the right choice ain't the smart one, but you make it anyway because that's what separates us from the monsters. Fuck tactics, Blade decided, turning right toward Gamma Team's position. Victor can wait. People dying right now can't. Tannis smiled, something almost human in the expression. Question 2. Why would a hunter who claims to operate on pure tactical assessment abandon his best chance to kill an elder vampire to save creatures he barely knows? Blade was already running, his vampire speed carrying him through Ortegaz's gothic corridors toward the sounds of battle. Because I've spent 30 years becoming really good at killing vampires, he called back. But I've never been good at letting people die when I could stop it. I guess that makes me human after all. He rounded a corner and emerged into carnage. The awakening chamber was a Gothic cathedral rendered in black marble and crimson tapestries, its vaulted ceiling held by columns carved with centuries of vampire history. At the chamber's eastern alcove, Victor's sarcophagus sat open but empty, the elder already sealed inside the stone itself, his body protected by layers of magical and physical shielding as hibernation claimed him. At the western alcove, Marcus stood fully awakened despite the ceremony's incomplete state. The first vampire's face had regenerated completely from Blade's UV damage, his ancient power radiating like physical pressure. Around him, 20 death dealers loyal to his vision of vampire supremacy formed a defensive perimeter. And caught between them and the chamber's entrance, a Gamma Team was dying. Selene fought with desperate skill, her twin pistols empty, resorting to captured death dealer weapons. 3 of her 5 Lykan specialists were already down, silver wounds preventing regeneration. The remaining 2 fought in full transformation, their wolf forms tearing through Marcus's guards but taking catastrophic damage in return. Selene! Marcus's voice carried across the chamber, ancient and terrible. Victor's perfect weapon, finally showing her true face. Did you think betraying an elder would go unpunished? That your pathetic alliance with mongrels would change anything? He moved with speed that made Selene look frozen, crossing the chamber to seize her throat. I'm going to drain you slowly, make you watch as I kill every Lycan in this fortress. Then I'll find your Daywalker pet and take his blood for my experiments. Your rebellion ends tonight, child. Blade's entrance was announced by a silver stake punching through the nearest death dealer's spine. The vampire crumpled, and Blade was already moving to the next target, his sword carving through Marcus's defensive perimeter with brutal efficiency. Hey, Marcus, Blade called out, his voice calm despite the carnage. Remember me? The science experiment you wanted to vivisect? I brought you a present. He hurled a UV grenade directly at the first vampire's position. Marcus released Selene and dodged with supernatural speed, but the blast caught 3 of his death dealers, reducing them to ash and screaming. Daywalker, Marcus snarled, his composure cracking. You should have accepted my partnership, should have evolved willingly. Now I'll take what I need from your corpse. The first vampire charged with speed that defied physics. Blade met him head-on, and when they collided, the impact shattered the marble floor beneath their feet. The true battle for Ortegaz had finally begun. Marcus fought like something that had perfected violence over a millennium. His movements were liquid brutality, each strike carrying strength that could shatter steel. But Blade had spent 30 years hunting things that thought age made them invincible, and he'd learned that ancient didn't mean unbeatable, just meant they'd had more time to develop patterns. The first vampire's claws raked toward Blade's throat. Blade twisted inside the attack, his elbow driving into Marcus's ribs with force that cracked bone. Marcus hissed, retaliating with a backhand that sent Blade crashing through a marble column. Stone exploded into shrapnel. Blade rolled to his feet, already moving as Marcus pursued. Behind them, Selene rallied the surviving Gamma Team members, using the chaos to retrieve weapons from fallen death dealers. The remaining Marcus loyalists tried to intervene, but the 2 remaining Lycan specialists intercepted them. Massive wolf forms tearing into vampire flesh with savage efficiency. You're strong, Daywalker, Marcus acknowledged, circling Blade with predatory focus. Faster than Victor anticipated, but you lack experience. I've been killing for 1,000 years. I've fought wars that reshaped continents. What are you compared to that? I'm the guy who's going to make you regret waking up, Blade replied, drawing his sword. And the silver blade caught the chamber's crimson lighting, gleaming with lethal promise. They clashed again, sword meeting claws and a screech of metal on bone. Marcus's talons were reinforced by vampiric power, hard as tempered steel, but Blade's sword was silver-edged and acid-etched, designed specifically to cut through supernatural resilience. The first vampire's hand came away with 3 fingers severed, black blood spraying across ancient marble. Marcus screamed, not in pain but in rage. 1,000 years without serious injury, and this hybrid mongrel had maimed him in seconds. His other hand shot forward, catching Blade's coat and hurling him across the chamber with enough force to crater the wall. Blade's enhanced durability absorbed impact that would pulverize human bones, but his ribs screamed protest. Blood, his own, a bright red mixed with black vampire taint, filled his mouth. He spat and stood, refusing to show weakness. "Selene," he shouted, "Victor's sarcophagus. Can you open it?" She understood immediately. "Not during hibernation seal. It's magically locked until the century turns." She dodged a death dealer's blade, her captured weapon putting a silver round through his skull. "Unless you have elder blood to break the enchantment." Blade's eyes found Tannis, who'd been observing from the chamber's periphery with scholarly detachment. "Still got Victor's blood in that vial?" "I do," Tannis confirmed, "but using it to wake an elder prematurely could—" "Do it," Blade ordered, launching himself at Marcus again to buy time. "We don't need to kill Victor during hibernation. We wake him up, she let these 2 ancient assholes fight each other." Marcus's regenerating hand caught Blade's sword mid-swing. "Clever, but Victor and I may hate each other's philosophies, but we both agree on one thing. Hybrids like you are abominations that must be eliminated." "Then you're both fucking idiots," Blade growled, headbutting Marcus with force that would shatter human skulls. The first vampire's nose exploded in a spray of black blood, his grip loosening. Blade wrenched his sword free and drove the pommel into Marcus's throat, crushing his windpipe. Marcus staggered back, his ancient body already healing, but too slowly. Blade pressed his advantage, each sword strike aimed at vital points with a hunter's precision. Cut the tendons, limit mobility, pierce the lungs, reduce combat effectiveness, target the eyes, eliminate sensory advantage. Where, across the chamber, Tannis approached Victor's sarcophagus with the vial of elder blood. The stone coffin was a masterwork of defensive engineering, 6 inches of consecrated granite reinforced with steel and covered in protective runes. But the sealing mechanism responded to Victor's blood signature, magical locks disengaging as Tannis applied the ancient fluid. The sarcophagus lid cracked open with a pneumatic hiss. Victor emerged from hibernation like wrath incarnate. His eyes snapped open. No grogginess, no disorientation, just immediate tactical assessment of the chaos surrounding him. He saw Marcus fighting Blade, saw Selene leading Lykans in his sacred chamber, saw death dealers dying and his ceremony disrupted. Treachery! Victor's roar shook the foundations of Ortagaz, his ancient power manifesting as telekinetic force that sent loose debris flying. "Marcus, you broke the covenant, awakened early to steal my century of rule." "Blame the Daywalker," Marcus snarled, still fighting Blade's relentless assault. "He's the disruption, not me." "I see you both fighting in my chamber while my fortress burns," Victor interrupted coldly. "I see conspiracy between the first vampire and the hybrid abomination. This is coup, Marcus, and coups have consequences." The elder vampire moved with speed that made Marcus look slow. His spiked gauntlet caught the first vampire's throat, slamming him against the chamber wall hard enough to crack stone. "You dare challenge me? I built this empire. I created the Coven structure. You're just the accident that started our race. And you're the tyrant who corrupted it," Marcus spat back, his regenerated hand clawing at Victor's face. 14 centuries of stagnation while I slept. You could have made us gods, Victor. Instead, you made us aristocrats playing at civilization." The 2 elders collided in combat that transcended anything Blade had witnessed. They moved too fast for human eyes to track, their strength shattering marble and bending steel. The awakening chamber became their battlefield, centuries of accumulated grievances exploding into violence. Blade used the opportunity to fall back to Selene's position. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds, her death dealer armor in tatters, but her eyes blazed with determination. The two surviving Lykan specialists flanked her, their wolf forms scarred but still dangerous. "We need to leave," Blade said, checking his remaining ammunition. "Let the elders kill each other. Mission's accomplished. I got the chalice." "The mission was killing Victor," Selene countered, "not just surviving." "Plans change," Blade replied, pulling her toward the chamber's exit. "Lucian's teams are being slaughtered out there. We stay, we die. We leave, we regroup and try again." The building shook as Victor slammed Marcus through 3 support columns. The first vampire's blood, ancient and potent, sprayed across sacred stone. He retaliated by tearing one of Victor's arms completely off at the shoulder, the limb hitting the floor with a wet thud. Both elders regenerated their wounds in seconds, their healing factors operating at speeds that defied biology. Yet they were creatures of pure survival, refined by millennia into something that couldn't easily die. "You're right," Selene admitted reluctantly. "We can't kill them both. Not like this." Blade grabbed Tannis as they retreated. "Question 3. How do you actually kill an elder vampire? And don't tell me sunlight. They've got protections against that." Tannis smiled even as they ran from the carnage. "You can't kill them conventionally, but there is one method: complete blood drainage. Drain an elder completely, and even their regeneration fails. They desiccate into mummified husks that can theoretically be revived, but are effectively dead." "How much blood are we talking?" "Every drop," Tannis replied, "which requires either specialized equipment or—" his eyes gleamed with scholarly excitement, "or another elder vampire feeding on them. A Marcus could drain Victor if he could restrain him long enough. Victor could drain Marcus. But neither would willing feed on the other, because ingesting elder blood creates unpredictable magical consequences." They burst into the corridor outside the awakening chamber, where the battle had spread like infection. Lycan corpses littered the halls alongside death dealer bodies. Reyes' alpha team had breached the fortress walls, but was being pushed back by sheer numbers. Lucian's beta team was pinned down 3 levels below, cut off from extraction routes. The revolution was failing. 200 Lycans had assaulted Ortegas, and Blade estimated less than 60 still fought. The rest were dead or dying, their silver wounds preventing regeneration, their bodies scattered across 14 centuries of Victor's accumulated power. Selene's radio crackled. "All teams, fall back! Extraction compromised! Repeat! Extraction—" Lucian's voice dissolved into weapon fire and screaming. "We're losing," one of the Lycan specialists said, his transformation receding to reveal a young man barely 20. "We never had a chance. Victor's too strong, too prepared." "No," Blade interrupted. "We just need to change tactics." His mind raced through options, calculating odds, finding the angle that would turn impossible into merely insane. "Selene, the fortress has a blood storage facility, right? Where the Covens keep their feeding supply?" "Sub-basement level," she confirmed. "Why?" "Because if we can't kill the elders with weapons, we make them kill each other with hunger." Blade outlined his plan quickly. Breach the blood storage, drain it into the fortress's foundation. He would create an artificial famine. 2 elder vampires, awakened and fighting, would exhaust their reserves rapidly. Once desperate with hunger, one would feed on the other. "That's insane," Selene said. "You're talking about starving 2 of the most powerful creatures in existence and hoping they turn on each other instead of on us. You got a better idea?" She didn't. None of them did. "Lucian," Blade broadcast on the Lycan frequency. "Change of mission. All teams converge on sub-basement blood storage. We're going to drain this fortress dry and let Victor and Marcus fight over the scraps." "That doesn't save my people dying right now," Lucian's voice carried anguish. "No plan saves everyone," Blade replied with brutal honesty. "But this one gives the survivors a chance. You want revenge or victory? Choose." Silence on the channel. "Or then all teams, you heard the Daywalker. Fighting retreat to sub-basement. Make them pay for every meter." The Lycans adapted with desperate efficiency, their guerrilla experience allowing coordinated fallback despite catastrophic casualties. They fought through corridors slick with blood. Black vampire, red human, the strange mixture that Lycan hybrids produced. Every room became a killing ground, every corner a potential ambush. Blade led Gamma team through the fortress's service passages, using maintenance routes Selene had memorized. Behind them, the awakening chamber exploded as Victor and Marcus's battle reached apocalyptic intensity. The elders had forgotten about the Lycans, forgotten about Blade, consumed entirely by their mutual hatred. They reached the blood storage facility, a massive refrigerated chamber containing thousands of blood bags arranged in medical precision. The Coven's feeding supply for the next decade, stolen from blood banks and unwilling donors across Eastern Europe. Destroy it all, Blade ordered. Bullets, blades, whatever it takes. Make this fortress run dry. The Lycans didn't need encouragement. They'd seen their people enslaved, their blood drained, their families destroyed to feed vampire aristocracy. Tearing apart the blood supply was catharsis rendered in violence. Thousands of bags ruptured, their contents flooding across sterile floors. The scent of blood, type O, AB, the rare varieties Victor's Coven preferred, filled the air with cloying sweetness. Blade helped, his sword puncturing storage containers with methodical precision. Above them, the fortress shook as Victor and Marcus's battle intensified. Both elders would be burning through their reserves, their regeneration taxing their body's blood supply with each catastrophic wound. Soon, very soon, they'd smell this waste and descend into feeding frenzy. "It's done," Selene announced, surveying the destruction. "Every blood bag destroyed, every reserve depleted. The fortress is bleeding out." Blade's enhanced hearing picked up something changing in the awakening chamber. The combat had stopped. Both elders had gone silent, their predatory instincts overriding rage as they detected blood being wasted. "They're coming," he warned. "Everyone out, now!" They ran, the surviving Lycans following Blade and Selene through the fortress's lower levels toward the eastern extraction tunnels. Behind them, the sound of approaching elders was like thunder, two ancient vampires descending with singular hunger. Victor reached the blood storage first, and his howl of rage echoed through Ortogaz like a curse. "They destroyed everything! Decades of reserves gone!" Marcus arrived seconds later, his wounds still regenerating, his body demanding sustenance. "There's blood here still, in the walls, soaked into stone. We can—" "There's better blood," Victor interrupted, his eyes finding Marcus with predatory focus. "Elder blood, first vampire blood, pure, potent, powerful enough to sustain me for the entire hibernation Victor never got to complete." Marcus's expression shifted to horror as he recognized Victor's intent. "You wouldn't dare. The Covenant forbids. You broke the Covenant when you awakened early." Victor lunged, his remaining hand catching Marcus's throat. "I should have done this centuries ago. Ended your evolutionary obsession, your dangerous experiments, your threat to the order I built." The elders collided again, but this time it wasn't about philosophy or dominance. It was about survival. Victor's fangs extended, aiming for Marcus's throat with clear intention to drain. Marcus fought with desperate savagery, recognizing that defeat now meant permanent death. Blade's team reached the extraction tunnels as the fortress above descended into complete chaos. Death dealers abandoned their posts to protect the blood storage Victor had failed to save. Lycans used the confusion to break through defensive perimeters and escape into Budapest's underground. Lucian met them at the rally point, his face bloodied but determined. "On a casualty count?" 143 dead, Reyes reported grimly. 57 extracted, 12 critically wounded. 2/3 of the Lycan resistance gone. An entire generation of fighters dead. Families destroyed, hopes shattered, the price of revolution paid in full. But above them, Ortogaz burned. Victor and Marcus were locked in death struggle. The Coven's blood reserves were destroyed, and in Blade's coat, the crimson chalice pulsed with dimensional energy, its purpose still unknown, but its recovery complete. "Did we win?" young Sonia asked, her voice small and broken. Blade looked at the survivors, wounded, traumatized, grieving. Looked at Selene, who'd betrayed 6 centuries of conditioning. Looked at Lucian, who'd led his people into a meat grinder for a chance at freedom. "We survived," he said finally. Sometimes that's the only victory available." In Ortogaz's highest chamber, Victor finally gained the upper hand, his superior combat experience overwhelming Marcus's raw power. The first vampire's struggles weakened as Victor's fangs found his throat, beginning the long drain that would mummify an elder. Marcus's last coherent thought was bitter recognition. Evolution meant nothing if you couldn't survive to implement it. The awakening ceremony had become a funeral, and the Gothic fortress that had stood for 14 centuries learned that some nights, even immortality had limits. The sun rose over Budapest 3 hours after the assault, painting the Danube gold and crimson. Blade stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, one of the few advantages his day-walking nature granted in a world of vampires who feared the light. Below, sirens wailed as human authorities responded to explosions and gunfire at Ortegaz. They'd find destruction, bodies, and no satisfactory explanation for what had occurred. The Lykan survivors had retreated to a secondary safe house across the river, licking their wounds and counting their dead. Blade had slipped away before dawn, needing distance from the grief and recrimination that follows catastrophic losses. He'd done what he came for, retrieved the Crimson Chalice. The rest was their war, not his, except it didn't feel that way. Contemplating your victory? Selene's voice came from behind him. She'd followed silently, her death dealer training allowing her to track even a daywalker when motivated. Contemplating the cost, Blade corrected. 143 Lykans dead. How many of them were kids like Sonia? And how many had families, futures, reasons to live beyond Victor's war? Selene stood beside him, her eyes on the city she'd helped protect for 6 centuries. All of them. Every single one had something to lose. They fought anyway because slavery isn't living. It's just slower dying. They were silent for a moment, watching smoke rise from Ortegaz. The fortress still stood, but something fundamental had broken inside it. 2 elder vampires locked in feeding frenzy, the blood reserves destroyed, the death dealer command structure shattered. Victor's empire hadn't fallen, but it had cracked. "What did you see?" Blade asked. "When we were leaving? What happened between Victor and Marcus?" Selene's expression was troubled. Victor was draining him, completely. Marcus tried to fight, but he was already weakened from our earlier battle and the accelerated awakening. By the time we reached the tunnels, the first vampire struggles had stopped. So Victor won. If you can call it winning. Selene's voice carried something like pity. He'll have consumed enough elder blood to sustain himself through hibernation and beyond. But elder blood is unpredictable. It could grant him Marcus's powers, or it could drive him insane. The old texts warn about the consequences of elders feeding on each other. There's a reason it's forbidden. Blade pulled the crimson chalice from his coat, studying it in daylight. The crystallized blood construct gleamed like a ruby, its dimensional energies more stable now that it was removed from Victor's vault. Tannis told me this thing can unmake barriers between worlds, and that the vampire cult I was hunting wanted it for some apocalyptic ritual. And now you have it, Selene observed. What will you do? Destroy it, Blade said simply. Whatever power it represents, it's too dangerous. The cult wanted to tear down dimensional walls, probably trying to unleash something from another reality, or pull resources from parallel worlds. Typical vampire megalomania. He moved to throw it off the rooftop, to shatter it against concrete 7 stories below. But the chalice pulsed in his hand, and suddenly he was seeing flashes of other worlds, other possibilities. A reality where vampires had won completely, where humanity existed only as cattle in blood farms. Another where Lykans had exterminated all vampires, becoming the new monsters. A third where the Crimson Chalice had never been created, where Blade had died as a child when his mother's delivery went wrong. The vision snapped off as Selene grabbed his wrist. Whatever it just showed you, don't trust it. Artifacts of power lie. They seduce you with possibilities while hiding the costs. Blade steadied himself, pushing back against the chalice's influence. Trying to show me alternatives. Trying to convince me it should be used, not destroyed. Then destroy it now before it shows you something you actually want. He raised the chalice again, but hesitated. Because in those flashes, he'd seen one vision that cut deeper than the others. A world where Whistler lived, where the portal never opened, where Blade completed his mission without dimensional displacement, and the old man who'd raised him survived to hunt another day. Blade, Selene's voice was urgent. I see it on your face. It showed you something personal, something you want badly enough to compromise. It showed me a world where my mentor didn't die, Blade admitted, where I made different choices, moved faster, and saved him. And if you use the chalice to reach that world, what happens to this one? Selene challenged. What happens to the 57 Lykans who survived because you helped them? To young Sonia, who saw a hybrid choose to protect instead of prey? To me, who learned from a daywalker that vampires can choose differently? Blade met her ice blue eyes. You're asking me to sacrifice my last connection to home for people I barely know, for a war that isn't mine. I'm asking you to recognize that it became your war the moment you chose to help instead of just taking your artifact and leaving, Selene replied. Honey, you taught Lykans how to fight efficiently, disarmed explosives to save children, turned two elder vampires against each other to give revolutionaries a chance. Those weren't tactical decisions, Blade. Those were choices, human choices. In the distance, Ortegaz's main gate opened. Death dealers emerged carrying a crystalline sarcophagus, Marcus's coffin, or what remained of the first vampire after Victor's feeding. They moved with funeral solemnity, uncertain of what came next now that their command structure had imploded. Blade thought of Whistler's final lesson, delivered through encrypted message. Sometimes the hardest hunt ain't tracking the monster. It's knowing when you've become what you're hunting. He'd spent 30 years killing vampires who chose to prey on humanity, who used their power for control, domination, so a satisfaction of hunger without conscience. He'd become very good at recognizing monsters, which meant he had to recognize when the monster's choice was looking back at him from a crystallized mirror. Use the chalice to pursue personal desire at reality's expense, or destroy it and accept that some losses couldn't be undone. Fuck, Blade said quietly. Then he brought the crimson chalice down against the rooftop's edge with all his hybrid strength. The artifact shattered with a sound like breaking dimensions. For a moment, reality itself seemed to crack. Blade glimpsed 1,000 possible worlds spilling through the fractures, each one a different choice, different consequence. Then the visions collapsed, the dimensional energies dissipated, and the chalice was just crystallized fragments on concrete. Whistler stayed dead. The vampire cult's apocalyptic ritual stayed prevented, and Blade remained trapped in a world where vampires built empires and Lykans fought for freedom he'd helped them achieve. I hope you're right, he said to Selene, that those choices mattered, because I just destroyed my only guaranteed way home for them. They mattered, she assured him. More than you know. She gestured toward the safe house across the river. Lucian's called a council meeting. The Lykan packs across Eastern Europe heard about Ortegaz, about the death dealer who turned traitor, the daywalker who wounded elders, the night Victor's empire cracked. They're talking about full revolution, about actually believing they can win. Blade shook his head. I'm not leading their revolution. No one's asking you to lead, Selene replied. But your presence changes the calculation. A hybrid who can walk in daylight, who knows how to kill efficiently, who proved elders can bleed. You're a symbol now, whether you want to be or not. I'm not a symbol. I'm a hunter. You're both, she countered, just like I'm both a death dealer and a traitor. Both Victor's weapon and someone choosing her own path. We don't get to decide how our choices define us to others. We only get to decide if we keep making them. Before Blade could respond, his enhanced hearing picked up movement in the streets below. Not human authorities. The footsteps were too measured, too coordinated. Death dealers, searching for survivors. For him. They're hunting us, he observed. They're afraid of us, Selene corrected. Victor consumed Marcus. Hot, but the Coven doesn't know what that means for his stability or sanity. The death dealers are fractured, some loyal to Victor's regime, others secretly sympathetic to Marcus's evolutionary philosophy, others just trying to survive the chaos. We showed them their elders aren't invincible. That's terrifying to creatures who base their entire society on immortal authority. She met his eyes. So what now, Daywalker? You completed your mission. The chalice is destroyed. You could try finding another way home, or what? Blade asked, though he already knew. "Or you stay," Selene said simply. "Help us finish what we started. Not as leader or symbol, but as what you are. A hunter who knows how to kill the monsters ruling this world." Victor's wounded, his covens fractured, his blood reserves depleted. And will never have a better opportunity to end his reign permanently. Blade thought about the Lykans who died in Ortagaz, about young Sonia, who carried her namesake's legacy of tragic hope, about Reyes and Lucian, and the 57 survivors who'd believed freedom was worth the cost, about Selene herself, 600 years old and choosing to question for the first time. He thought about Whistler's voice. Hunt the monsters, all of them. Don't matter what they look like or what excuses they make. You see something preying on innocent people, you end it. Victor was a monster. Marcus had been a monster. The entire Coven system that enslaved Lykans and preyed on humanity, all monsters. Just because they wore suits and ruled from Gothic fortresses didn't change what they were. Fine, Blade decided. I'll stay until Victor's dead. Not for the revolution, not for Lykan freedom, just because leaving that ancient bloodsucker alive offends my professional pride. Consider it unfinished business. Selene smiled, genuine and warm despite 6 centuries of death-dealer coldness. I'll take it. They moved toward the safe house together, two hybrids walking in daylight while the vampire world slept and feared. Behind them, Ortagaz smoldered. Inside it, Victor stirred in his sarcophagus, forever changed by consuming the first vampire's blood. Around them, Budapest awakened to a new reality where the immortal order that had ruled for 14 centuries was cracking. And across Eastern Europe, in hidden strongholds and underground tunnels, Lykans heard whispers of the night the death dealer turned traitor and the daywalker made elders bleed. They heard, and they believed for the first time in 60 years that their chains could actually break. The war was far from over. Victor lived, wounded, but adapting. The death dealer armies remained largely intact. The Coven infrastructure still controlled most of Europe's shadows. But something fundamental had shifted. The balance of terror that kept Lykans enslaved and vampires confident in their supremacy. Blade had come to this world hunting an artifact. He'd found instead a war that needed his particular expertise, people who needed his ruthless competence, and a choice about what kind of hunter he wanted to be. Not the weapon his vampire nature made him, not the slave to mission that Whistler's training demanded, but something harder, a hunter who chose his targets based on something more than tactical necessity, and a hunter who recognized that sometimes the right choice wasn't the smart one, but you made it anyway because that's what separated you from the monsters. As they reached the safe house, Lucian emerged to meet them. The Lycan revolutionary's face was lined with grief for the fallen, but his eyes blazed with determination. Victor's wounded, the covens are fractured, and we have a daywalker who knows how to kill elders, Lucian said. Tell me, Blade, are you ready to finish what we started? Blade checked his weapons. Silver stakes, UV grenades, the sword that had tasted elder blood. He thought of Whistler, of 30 years hunting vampires across continents, of a promise made to a dying mentor that monsters would always find him waiting. Some motherfuckers, he said calmly, are always trying to ice skate uphill. And in that moment, he's surrounded by revolutionaries and outcasts. The daywalker who'd crossed dimensions found something he hadn't expected, a war worth fighting, allies worth protecting, and a purpose beyond simple survival. The blood moon had passed, but the hunt, the real hunt, for Victor's black heart and the liberation of everyone he'd enslaved, was just beginning. Victor had ruled for 14 centuries. He'd survived countless challenges, adapted to every threat, crushed every rebellion. He thought himself eternal, untouchable, beyond consequence. He'd never faced a hunter who walked in sunlight, who'd perfected vampire extinction into lethal science, who'd spent 3 decades learning that immortality just meant more time to develop weaknesses. The Gothic fortress of Ortagaz still stood, but its foundations had cracked. The elder vampire still lived, but his invincibility had shattered. The empire of blood and lies remained, but its subjects had seen their masters bleed. And somewhere in the depths of that fortress, Victor opened eyes corrupted by consuming the first vampire's blood. And for the first time in 14 centuries, he felt something he'd forgotten existed. Fear. because the Daywalker had made a choice, not just to survive, not just to complete a mission, but to stay and finish what rebellion had started. The hunt would continue, the war would escalate, and when it finally ended, Budapest would remember the night a hybrid from another world showed them that even ancient monsters could be mortal. The days that followed became legend in Lykan oral tradition, the time when a hunter from beyond dimensions stood with the enslaved against their immortal masters. Blade didn't lead the revolution. That remained Lucian's purpose. But he taught them to fight like he fought, ruthlessly, efficiently, with no mercy for creatures who claimed superiority through age alone. Victor survived, but he was forever changed. The first vampire's blood granted him new powers, the ability to transform into something between vampire and beast, speed that surpassed even Marcus's ancient grace. But it also destabilized his mind, made him paranoid, erratic. The elder who'd ruled through calculated tyranny became something more dangerous, unpredictable. Selene found her own path, no longer death dealer or simple revolutionary, but something new. A bridge between species, proving that vampires could choose honor over hunger. Young Sonia grew into a warrior worthy of her namesake, by carrying the hope that love between species wasn't treason, but evolution. And Blade hunted, not just vampires, though he killed plenty in the months that followed. He hunted the corruption itself, the system that made monsters of both predator and prey, that turned survival into justification for atrocity. The Crimson Chalice remained destroyed, its dimensional energies scattered across realities. Blade never found another way home, never saw Whistler's face again, except in dreams. But he learned that home wasn't always a place. Sometimes it was a purpose, a choice to stand against darkness, even when the tactical odds said run. Victor's empire fractured slowly, inevitably, as Lycan resistance spread across Europe. The war would continue for years, perhaps decades. But the psychological battle had already been won. The night the Daywalker proved that elders could bleed, that 14 centuries of dominion could crack in 6 hours of coordinated fury. Some nights, standing on Budapest's rooftops, watching the sun rise over a city still controlled by monsters, Blade wondered if Whistler would approve of his choices, if the old man would understand why he'd stayed in this world, committed to a war that wasn't his, for people who weren't his kind. Then he'd remember Whistler's final lesson, delivered through actions more than words. You hunt the monsters, all of them, wherever they are, however long it takes. And Blade would smile, the cold, humorless expression of a hunter who'd found his prey and knew the chase would be long, brutal, and absolutely necessary, because some monsters needed killing. And some hunters were too damn stubborn to know when to quit. The blood moon would rise again. The war would continue. But Victor's eternal reign had an expiration date now, measured not in centuries but in the relentless approach of a daywalker who'd crossed dimensions to prove a simple truth. Even immortals die. They just take longer.